Hello, welcome. This is the recap of the third week of Tranche 3, Phase 2 of the undercover policing inquiry. It was a real mixed bag this week. We had both an undercover officer, Jason Bishop, cover name Jason Bishop, who gave evidence over 2 days, the Monday and the Thursday, a bit unusual. In between him, we had two of the women who were deceived into sexual relationships by the undercover officer, Carlo Soracchi, who will be giving evidence next week, starting on Tuesday with Lindsey, and on Wednesday with Donna Mclean. And then on Thursday, we had Lois Austin, who was second time appearing at the inquiry. She appeared last year, people may remember, talking about the infiltration of her activities by the undercover officer, Peter Francis. This one was looking at how Carlo Soracchi had a huge impact on the May Day 2001 kettling case, which we'll get to through it in due course. There's quite a lot of us on the call this week, which is great to see. Should we just do a quick sort of go round to introduce ourselves? I'm Tom Fowler, regular host, and I'm joined with people want to just, as you appear on screen, go through. Start with Carolyn. You're on mute.
Muted.
Sorry, what failure. So my name's Carolyn. I'm one of the core participants. I was spied on by multiple spy corps. And one of the groups I was involved in was spied on by Jason Bishop, which was Reclaim the Streets. Another one was Earth First.
Okay, yeah. Kate and Ben? You're on mute. Okay, Ben and Kate, you're on mute.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm Ben. I was, amongst other officers, reported on by Jim Boyling, who spoke the week before, and a little bit by Jason Bishop, but I have really had very little disclosure from him.
And I'm Kate. I was also spied on by Jason Bishop, and there were a couple of questions asked about me during the questioning of him. A bit to say about that, but yeah, that's it.
Evelyn? Evelyn?
I'm Evelyn Lewis, and I was muted, not anymore. I'm with the Undercover Research Group, and I've been present at most of the hearings.
Donald?
Donald Driscoll, Vic in person, the Undercover Research Group, and spied on by quite a few undercovers.
Bristol?
Hi there. I'm not a core participant, but I do have an interest in quite a lot of the issues, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that I might have met a few of them, such as Jim Boyling onwards.
And Emily?
I'm Emily, core participant, also spied on by quite a lot of them, but in particular by Jason Bishop.
Yeah, okay, so we started the week with Jason Bishop on Monday morning. As is typical with the undercover policing inquiry, the week started with a restriction order. So nobody got to hear the very opening statements, the introduction of him, because there was a restriction put in place. The broadcast was suspended. We had a whole bunch of faff about that. Turned out it was a false alarm, which actually means the police complained about something, which then they had to withdraw. And then, yeah, there was no restriction at all in place. Once again, the inquiry loves to start with a bit of a farce. Opened in the usual way, with him being asked about his training, his targeting, his recruitment into the unit. Asked about the SDS prefers blokes in stable relationships. I would say Jason Bishop started off the beginning of the day, his first day of questioning, being very professional in the way that he approached answering of the questions. He certainly didn't talk very much about other officers. He talked about the way that he was recruited into the unit. He talked about numerous non-stop scenarios being presented to him, and him having to do a quick fire answering of these scenarios. It was supposedly to explore his moral code. his willingness to report on his friends for the greater good. The greater good. Yeah, he says he can't remember anything being asked about sexual approaches. He said drugs came up, and he said that he would take whatever he was offered, which, from what I've heard, appears to be something that he really took to heart. He said he was told lots of cautionary tales by the undercover officers. He claimed not to know about the bank card that Mark Jenner was presented with by Alison. He spoke to all the other undercover officers in the field. He spoke the most with Jim Boyling before being deployed. He claims to have been completely unaware of the sexual relationships until much later. He has no recollection of Boyling mentioning the sexual relationship to him, as Boyling said that he did. He also met with Christine Green, HM26. He didn't claim not to know that she was in a sexual relationship. He was unaware of any of the undercover officers being in any sort of sexual relationships. Completely not credible, given what else we've heard from those officers. He talked about the tradecraft manual. He claimed that he didn't put much store in it, didn't think it was that important. He said he didn't agree with it when it mentioned sexual relationships, but he didn't bring it up. He claimed that the views in the tradecraft manual about sexual relationships were outdated even for 1998, which is quite impressive, as we've now got to the point where the late 90s is considered ancient history and a different time. He was asked about Operation Muscat, which was about John Dines being searched for by Helen Steele. He claimed not to remember much detail about this. We heard, him bits and pieces of him reporting back to that. We had the stuff about the new code of conduct, which was apparently because of James Thompson's deployment. He claimed to be completely unaware of James Thompson's deployment. He said there was a vibe shift, but claims that he didn't know why the vibe shift had happened. He said he got advice from Jim Boyling about being in the environmental field. He claimed not to recognize a lot of the terminology that Jim Boyling used about high maintenance and low maintenance officers. And then we got to his stuff about the fact that he had cover employment as an assistant to a computer programmer. This led him to doing the City and Guilds. He said it was work that he wasn't comfortable with. And there's a whole thing about him changing that job to doing a different job. So I'm just going to play a little clip now that talks about that, and we'll have a bit of a chat about this aspect of his deployment.
Location in order that he can commit himself full-time to any future planning groups that our Reclaim the Streets create. Now, in the absence of Psycho Dream, Red Herring must be available for future campaigns, and it is therefore necessary to remove the problems that he cited as a bar to his participation. The suggestion seems to be there that there'd been some comment made about the level of your participation in Reclaim the Streets. Is it correct to say that it was decided at this stage that you needed to change your cover employment in order to free you up?
I don't know about the chronology, but yes, I think there was a big push from both myself and the office that things needed to change.
Right. Again, in very broad terms, can you please tell us what it was that your cover employment changed to? You can say pirate DVDs.
Okay, I wasn't sure about third-party. Apologies, I didn't.
No, but you can say
yes,
pirate DVDs is fine.
Yes, I was a DVD pirate.
Did you also sell software? Not sell, apologies, I misspoke. Did you also, as your cover ID?
I had access to software that I could supply, yes.
To the best of your recollection, did this new cover role, was this introduced around this time, around November 2000?
If there's documentation that supports that, then I'm not sure the chronology, but we definitely did move towards that.
Again, just talking very broadly and generally, HN3, did you have a view on this suggestion about the change to your cover employment? Were you pleased? Was it something you welcomed? Did you have any reservations?
I felt my deployment changed immeasurably once I changed, yes.
You mean for the better? And why is that?
I was never, as I said before, I was never comfortable with the initial. So this was something that I felt comfortable with, I had knowledge of. It was able to do all the things that you've just seen in that document.
Was there any discussion? You refer in your witness statement to there being extensive discussions about this. And you also refer to the fact that you were instructed not to sell the DVDs. Were there any additional discussions, again, just speaking very broadly, about any possible pitfalls about your cover job entailing criminal activity?
I don't think so. I don't know if you could expand a bit more. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
No, don't worry. It's just a broad thing, whether or not the ethics of it, whether or not there were any concerns about the fact that it might lead you into, for example, having to sell a DVD.
No, I was told not to stand on street corners selling DVDs.
You say in your witness statement about this that you occasionally lent copies to activists. You say that activists occasionally borrowed copies, but the quality was generally so awful, they did not approach me too often.
They were terrible, yes.
Emily Apple disputes this, and she says that actually the DVDs were exceptionally good quality, and that you told the activists that this was because they were airline copies. New releases before they hit video shops, for example.
No, that's not. I don't dispute what she's saying, but that's not correct. I could give you the cover story of where they came from.
No, don't worry about that. We won't go there, but it's your recollection that they were poor quality.
They were awful.
Emily Apple also said that you gave them away rather than lending them. Is that right?
I think it was very difficult not to be wanting money for them, but it would be fair to say if somebody wanted a DVD, I would give it to them and say, look, can you just give it back when you're finished? That'd be fair, Colin.
And did you take requests for the DVDs?
People asked if I could get hold of things, yes.
Emily Apple says that you used to turn up at the end of Womble's meetings bearing DVDs that people had requested. Do you recall that? It make you popular, being able to provide these DVDs?
I don't know about that, but it gave me an avenue of an employment that I felt comfortable in.
Looking quickly at software, is it accurate to say that you were also involved, you say this in your witness statement, illegally downloaded and cracked software?
Yes, that's correct.
And you started doing this at the same time as you started doing the...
It was in parallel, but only a very small proportion of that work.
Right. Can you recall the kind of software that you provided? Photoshop, Illustrator, Dreamweaver, Quark, Cubase. Does that sound right?
I completely agree with that. Yes, that would be an example of the software. Yes.
In your witness statement at same paragraph 252E, you say that you supplied this software only where the activists could have obtained it themselves. Can I ask, what do you mean by that?
Well, they had bought it themselves, I think.
Emily Apple disputes that. Again, I can't bring her witness statement up because it's not published yet, but she says that in relation to that point, that they could have got it themselves, she says, this was before fast internet connections and easy access to sites to download pirated software. None of us had any money. We would not be able to buy this software, and we did not have the means or contacts to obtain counterfeit versions. We were only able to access it because Jason Bishop provided it to us.
Again, I think I understand. So this wasn't software provided to me by a third party. I just knew where to go and find it. So it was available to anyone if you knew where to look. Does that help?
Well, I think she's making the point that they would not have had access to this software unless you had given them access, so that it's not as if they would have been illegally downloading software had it not been for you. That's the point she's making. Do you think that's fair enough?
I think if you knew where to find it, you could download it yourself.
Would you agree that, we're talking the early 2000s, that it wasn't something that was widely...
Yes, I'd agree.
...known about?
Yes.
Hashtag SpyCops.
Yeah, did you get a dodgy DVD off Jason Bishop? Anyone?
Yeah, I got loads.
Were they shit?
No. No, they were airline quality. Because there was this whole thing that airlines got releases before they even went on to VHS back in the day. And so loads of them were really, really, really good quality, and he always used to turn up with them. So yeah, we had lots of them.
I mean, it's interesting. It's one of the things he pushed back on was this idea that it made him popular. He was like, as if that wasn't the whole point of doing this kind of job. I'm sure it's a very, very effective means of ingratiating himself into a wider, large group and being known as that person.
No, definitely. And also in terms of his cover, like someone who is doing something else that's dodgy, you are far less likely to suspect than anyone else. So yeah, and it did make him popular. The question that wasn't asked as well was about any of the malware or spyware that he was putting on devices from this software as well. And like, it was just ludicrous. Like, we had dial-up modems, and like, when we were lucky, one computer between several of us living in a house. Like, we couldn't access, like, even if we knew the sites to access, like, we didn't have even like the internet speeds and stuff to be able to be getting cracked software.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite amusing. It's like, his whole response to that, I just find it quite amusing. Just going through, and if anybody else got any comments about anything, please feel free to jump in at any point.
I mean, just one other thing on that. It was just this, because she kept saying this like broadly and generally, or no, don't worry about that. It was just like, well, we are worried about that. Can you go a bit deeper? I don't know what. She was like, this was quite. I mean, we'll probably get onto how useless she was generally, but there were Sorry, Tom?
I was just saying, I mean, please do say now. I mean, it's
I mean, just all of the questioning. It was obsequious. It was apologetic. It didn't nail the points. It was just all over the place. She kept getting documents wrong. She felt woefully underprepared. But it was always like this. Like, he'd start saying something, or then ask a question, and she'd be like, "Oh, no, don't worry. Oh, no, that's all right." And I was, we couldn't see him because he had a restriction over the video link and us seeing his image, but it was all just all over the place. And it was just kind of like, I wanted to shout, yes, worry. Yeah, these are the things we need to know.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times when she asked.
Carolyn, go.
I was going to say, there's a lot of times she asked him a question and then didn't wait for the answer. Didn't even say, "Don't worry." She just sort of went on to something else completely different. Really frustrating to listen to. And at first, I thought she was sort of doing this on purpose to sort of lull him into a false sense of security. And then it became obvious that it was just incompetence or obsequiousness or whatever. I did want to mention one thing that happened earlier on. Right at the start of the day, he said, his wife was very happy with him and his new job as a spy cop, and there was never any welfare visits. And then he said that at some point when the code of conduct came in, that the spy cops got called into a meeting and told that if they were having relationships, those relationships had to stop. And we didn't really hear very much more about that. But he said at the time some comment about he thought that was being done because the police felt they had a duty of care towards the spy cops' families, not a duty of care towards us or the women that were being deceived. But there was no other questions about that, so we didn't really explore it any further at any point, which is, again, frustrating.
Yeah, incredibly frustrating. There were quite a few moments like that where there was a little glimpse of something that was then just dropped and not looked into further.
If I can just jump in there, tying the two things together, the whole topic of the pirate DVDs is introduced with reference to extensive discussions with management over the nature of the ethics of buying or selling or borrowing or lending apparently unlicensed goods. But if there's that level of interest from management in what you do with DVDs, why is there not comparable extensive discussions about sexual relationships and other issues? Especially as Bishop was very clearly happy to talk about how he felt he'd been authorized to commit criminal offences. Surely that would undercut the idea that it was essential to be having these essential discussions about pirate DVDs and not other areas where there's clearly a lot less guidance that he's admitting to.
Tom, I don't know if you can hear me, but
Tom, I don't think we can hear you.
Hear you.
Like a total loser, I've been on mute this entire time. What a jerk! So I was just saying about the SDS Safe House meetings. He talked about how they operated. They'd be twice a week, about how they would be in the round, or you would hear other officers giving updates. He claimed that there was, he initially mentioned a drinking culture, and he then rolled back on that. He claimed that the drinking culture disappeared whilst he was there. And he said the drinking culture he was referring to was 1 or 2 pints after a meeting, after which everyone would drive home, and that nobody would ever drink drive. He said there was no banter within the SDS. He said that he never heard any sexism, and he's sure that there was never any racism. He said it was not a sexist culture. Immediately after him saying that it was not a sexist culture, we got to see some of his reporting. We saw him using some fairly appalling language about a woman who had hepatitis, talking about her being generous with other people with it, and some other gross stuff. He very quickly accepted it was inappropriate. He was asked about HN81, the man as we know who Peter Francis talked extensively about his extreme racism. He claims that he said he doesn't remember him ever talking about Dwayne Brooks or any of the Lawrence family, but he said there was someone else he was talking about, and he wrote it down. We later found out that was Alex Alawande. It gives the impression that he would make very offensive remarks, pejorative remarks about Alex Alawande. He claims that there was no discussion whatsoever within the SDS about the Stephen Lawrence murder, which, again, not very credible. We then got to one of the roles that Jason Bishop appears to have within the SDS, which was to be some sort of social secretary. And he perked up when this was first mentioned, when he talked about the social trip to Las Vegas. He said initially it was just something that he and HN60 chatted about, and then before you know it, the whole roadshow was going. He claimed that it was all about food. So they went to Nevada for its food scene. He also went on the trip to Amsterdam. It was pointed out to him that the places they chose were also places where sex work is legalized. He claims that was that was a complete coincidence, and that none of the officers used sex workers or took any drugs, apart from himself. And Mark Jenner took some used cannabis in Amsterdam. But apart from that, there was definitely nothing going on at all. He said that they all went for a meal together each day and then went and did their own thing. He claimed that he was into gambling and certainly nothing else. We've heard quite a bit about these social trips. Does anybody want to make any comment about them?
Well, Las Vegas is obviously known for its gourmet food.
Yeah, quite. So we then looked at his tasking. Initially, he was meant to be going into animal rights, but it was eventually that was switched to environmental anarchist groups. He says he was aware that during the 18th, Capital Against Capitalism was a focus for C Squad at the time, and he researched the groups and the meetings on the internet about during the 18th. His brief, he said, was Reclaim the Streets. The first 6 months, he was told there was no pressure on him to produce reports. And his first report was of the Diggers' 350th anniversary on 5th of March 1999. Organised by the Land Is Ours. He says he wasn't expecting to stay the night, so he didn't bring a tent. He was told that there was that Rosa remembers having a chat with him around the campfire in the early hours of the morning. And he said, "Oh, I didn't have a tent." And it was pointed out by people that you don't actually need a tent to sit around a campfire, but he managed to swat off that question with that answer. This is something we see a lot. I mean, one of the frustrations with the kind of questioning we see is that a question is asked, a nonsense answer is given, and it feels like the Council of Inquiry doesn't listen to the answer and just accepts that answer and moves on. He said he claimed it wouldn't be obvious to others in the Reclaim the Streets that Jim Boyling was a key organiser. He says he only knew that he was a key organiser because of private meetings he had with Boyling, HN58 and others. He says he took a part in June the 18th himself, but mostly in terms of giving out flyers. He was asked about this, the lack of communication between the Met and the City of London Police. He claimed that he didn't, he wasn't aware of any of that. He couldn't recall the police using horses or CS gas on June the 18th. He admitted he didn't see a woman being dragged off a horse, but he heard that somebody else that she had, somebody else that she had been hit by a spade. I mean, we got this whole thing of him identifying supposedly an American with dreadlocks who admitted to some sort of disorder that he reported back. We had a whole section where we were shown some of his reports where he said that having an anti-capitalist agenda guaranteed disorder. He rolled back on that. Pretty much any time he was presented with any of his reporting, which he was like, "Oh yeah, that's wrong." I accept that that was wrong. Often he said, he didn't write it up, so it couldn't have been him. But we were also able to see some of his raw reports this time. Unlike many of the other undercover officers who only gave oral reports to their handlers, he gave written reports, and we saw both sorts. So he talked about the desk meetings that the SDS would have with C Squad, which he said were twice a year. He claimed that they were arranged at the request of the desk about getting first-hand accounts of what it was like at Reclaim the Streets meetings. They would go along to them, and C Squad would turn up with like binders full of photographs, which they would present to the SDS officers for them to identify people. This was quite interesting. This whole thing was quite interesting, as it was that the first time we've heard that there's this formal face-to-face meetings that existed between field officers from the SDS and C Squad, and it really sort of like dismisses this bullshit that we've heard from so many officers that the SDS officers were a secret, that nobody knew that they were undercover, yet they were. I don't know if I believe that it was only twice a year that these meetings were happening, but certainly there were regular occurrences where C Squad would get to see the undercover officers in a backroom role. Does anybody want to comment on that? Fair enough. So Bishop said he was present on November the 30th. His reporting suggested there was a lack of energy and a lack of interest in the movement. He stands by that, regardless of the fact that what actually happened during the day. We saw in his reports him saying that, contrary to what the national press is reporting, that organisers were planning a peaceful protest. He said that late on the evening of it, there was an attack on the police. He played it down when he was pushed on that. He said it was sort of pushing and shoving with lots of running around. And he said, yes, this was the first use of Section 16, what later became known as kettling. And I mean, he admitted that violence started when people were trying to go home and the police were preventing them. He was outside the police kettle on November the 30th. He said it was inevitable that if Reclaim the Streets organised a peaceful protest, it would end in disorder. we were shown minutes from a strategy meeting about his deployment from January 2000. He said he would made great strides, now feels comfortable at meetings, and has a number of social friends outside meetings.
Can you not hear me, Tom?
We saw some more of his reports. He claimed he kept his distance from Jim Boyling when he was in the field, and he tries to play down the idea that he would obviously have noticed that Jim Boyling was in a relationship with Rosa at this time. He said he claimed to be completely unaware of that. He says that he got the impression it might be the case when they had phone calls to the office from Rosa at a later date. But even then, he pretended that he still didn't know later than that, and it had to be pointed out to him.
Can you hear me now, Tom?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so I tried to cut in earlier, but my mic volume was down. No, just about the M30 stuff. I mean, that again, that's one of these areas where, you know, it was skimmed over by counsel to the inquiry and none of the important questions were asked. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things to unpack. The first is, and this is gone into in detail in the RTS witness statement, that Bishop actually received a commendation, like so many of these officers did at the end of his deployment. And they highlight in the commendation the things that he did, and they include first-rate intelligence around June the 18th. And as you said, like on his own account, his intelligence on June the 18th was got from the internet. And also first-rate intelligence around November 30th. And he also says in his witness statement that, you know, at that point, he just wasn't in Reclaim the Streets, really. He was going along to a couple of meetings. He went along to the demo like any other person might have gone along to the demo. And so there's this, you know, it's put across in the police documents as though his role in all of this was incredibly important, whereas actually, you know, he was going along, writing reports on public meetings, getting public information off the internet and passing that back to the police. And you know, that forms about 50% of what he was commended for at the end of his deployment, actually, was that early Reclaim the Street stuff. And what we see with Bishop's deployment is basically the decline of Reclaim the Streets, and him kind of reporting on very unpleasant reporting, very snidey. He's going along to these meetings of a group that is basically, I think the term he used was being policed out of existence. And obviously he doesn't want it policed out of existence. He wants Reclaim the Streets to continue and to continue to justify his job. And counsel really skimmed over all of this. And both with Boyling and with Bishop, I think there's a lot to look at around the end of Reclaim the Streets, particularly the stuff that Bishop was involved in that we don't really see in the questions, but you do see in the documents.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where the inquiry makes no effort to like link these things together. We you know, when we're in the hearings, we just get the questions that are asked. Occasionally, they'll point things like that out to the witness, but very rarely. And certainly, that wasn't something we got from Daisy Monaghan in the questioning of Jason Bishop at all. Moving on to May Day 2000. According to Jason Bishop, Reclaim the Streets was an absolute shambles by the time we got to May Day 2000. He was involved in the gardening subgroup, but he claims, and part of the decision-making process, but he claimed he had no influence at all. He accepts that he was regularly seen by GRD in the Reclaim the Streets house, but he claimed he didn't know the London Greenpeace and McLarble computer was kept there. We saw the minutes from a meeting where him and Jim Boyling had a meeting with their managers where they discussed preventing the leaflets about May Day from being distributed, but it was dismissed as unviable. So Bishop claims this is the first and only time that he ever had a meeting about disrupting something. And he said he'd never heard of disruption tactics being used before. He sort of claimed supposedly this meeting was an absolute aberration. And as you can see, it was the idea was dismissed. The idea that, I mean, he was very, very keen to stress this, that they didn't do disruption. I mean, that's very much the contrary of the lived experience of those of us who are infiltrated. And certainly what is being suggested in that particular document about preventing the distribution of leaflets suggests that disruption was very much a key part of SDS officers' toolkit.
I mean,
he also claims not to. Well, yeah, Emily?
I was just going to say, it's also, I mean, not only is it contrary to our lived experience, it's contrary to so many of the documents that we have, even with Bishop. She did come to like a couple of them on the second day, but there's even more that I can't talk about yet. But so many times when it's just kind of like he's pointing out interpersonal conflicts and actually highlighting ways that they can be used, but that was just a blanket no. Also with the questioning, like at the beginning, she started off talking about Monopoly Mayday, which was 2001. Then she like remembered it was like the Guerrilla Gardening 2000, and she kept muddling up the years lots of times throughout the questioning, and it was just a complete lack of awareness and understanding of the material. I mean, Bishop's answers were awful, her questioning was awful, but you know, like it doesn't help when she keeps getting the years muddled up either.
Yeah, I thought I was confused by it. So Ben?
I mean, there was a lot of times when she asks a question and then answers it for him. The clip you showed earlier about the DVDs, for example, where she says she made a mistake asking him whether he was selling stuff as well. She preempts stuff, she answers for him, and often there's no answer. She'll ask a question, he answer, and she moves on. And I don't know if in the room, like he's nodding and they see something that we don't see, but there's no audio. He didn't answer the question. You moved on. It's really, really odd.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the feeling, listening to the questioning of Bishop, that there were a bunch of different dynamics going on. One was that because disclosure has come so late, the bundle has been prepared so late, and the inquiry is basically so unprepared for this, that she just really didn't have a handle on the material. And, you know, you heard her saying, well, you know, I'm going to quote something to you. I can't pull it up because we haven't actually got it in a way to publish it, which was nonsense, because it's not like anyone was actually seeing the documents that she was pulling up anyway, because it was audio only. But yeah, so there was that kind of unpreparedness. And then I also got the impression, I mean, we know that Bishop's identity has not been revealed because of whatever job he was doing now. And frankly, the sycophantic behaviour of counsel to the inquiry throughout the questioning, just throughout the questioning, but also there was just a kind of suggestion quite often that there was a lot we weren't seeing. So she would repeatedly say, we're not going to go there. You know, you don't need to go there, and kind of almost kind of cut him off at the pass and make sure he didn't actually answer the questions that she was asking. And I don't know, I mean, certainly that seemed to be something that was going on with the source of the DVDs, for example. But yes, like generally throughout, there was a sense of there's so much we're not seeing, and partly that's just because, like, counsel is so unprepared, she's probably not even aware that it exists, and partly it felt like there was a whole bunch of other stuff that counsel was just really keen for us not to get anywhere near. It was very, very, very frustrating hearing.
Yeah, it really was. Further on that thing about the preemptive stuff, the document goes on to say that there was a plan to preemptively arrest the organisers of May Day 2000, but this was dismissed as it was unlikely to be lawful. And there was a concern that the Met Police had been inadvertently funding Reclaim the Streets by so many wrongful arrests that had led to compensation. So it was decided that they weren't going to do that because it would probably be unlawful. So they were going to use stop and search in order to dissuade people. which Bishop's very quick to say, to making sure it was lawful, of course, obviously, you still have to be lawful in terms of, and have probable cause to do stop and search. But you can see from the wording of the report that they weren't too concerned about that. This was about using any means at their disposal in order to intimidate people out of taking action, of being involved in protest.
But I think it was also that wording as well, that their concern was that people were getting money from wrongful arrests, not that we were being wrongfully arrested all the bloody time, and that all our rights were being infringed all the time, but we were funding our movements because they kept nicking us for nothing, and that is disgusting in and of itself.
Yeah, it was the clued up people who knew that they could sue the police and get money that they were worried about. Didn't worry about the unclued up people being wrongfully arrested, or that might have had the opportunity if only they knew their rights.
And I mean, the significance of this stuff. It's called Operation Apache, I believe, and it is the police conspiracy behind the scenes to undermine and make sure that Reclaim the Streets could not mobilise for May Day. And this is when Bishop talks about Reclaim the Streets being policed out of existence. This is what it is, and the plan includes possible plans to raid the print shop to make sure that flyers can't get printed, and then when they decide that might put their SDS operation at risk, they move to plans to transport the flyers to people's houses and then raid people's houses in order to seize the flyers. But they're very, very keen to make sure that the publicity for this event can't get out. And then they settle on this idea of outright harassment, and they build a list of people, leading lights in Reclaim the Streets, including their own officers, in order to boost their credibility, and single them out for harassment. So the stop and search, but and we heard from Jay Jordan about how he was getting stopped with his kid in the street and harassed by uniform around this time, and his name is on the list. And it's basically a special branch plot to break a political organisation's ability to organise. It's
through police harassment.
It's absolutely outrageous. I was really taken aback when I saw, not necessarily that it happened, but that it was written down and it was that clear, and this was their kind of game plan,
Yeah, absolutely. As it turns out, Jason Bishop gets arrested on his way to May Day 2000. He's driving a GRD's van that we heard about before, that was contained seeds, manure, and other props for the guerrilla gardening. He's kept in Charing Cross Police Station for the entirety of the day. It seems like his SDS bosses are quite pleased about the fact he got nicked. This is a benefit to his cover. He's referred to as one of the manure 2 in the in a quite flippant tone in the documentation. In the end, there's no charges brought, so it's considered like a positive thing. In his report, it says not much to say about Monday with 16 exclamation marks. He doesn't end up actually being involved at all for that day. Does anybody want to talk about his arrest? Yeah, so then he was asked about the fact that he referred to HN1, cover name Matt Rayner, as a legend and was considered had legendary status among other SDS officers. He was asked to write down the names of other officers who had that same legendary status. It turned out that it was the only other officer he named was one who is in the restricted area. That's the restricted area that's not the left wing, which we're not allowed to mention. Donald.
Which begs the question, since all the other legendary officers we know, like Lambert and Dines and Rayner, have all got seriously big question marks over their activities. So is there another officer out there who's, got some major question marks about the behavior and set other people up?
Yeah, absolutely. We then got to the questions about the Earth First Summer Gathering, which he said was, it was obligatory for anybody who was infiltrating the environmental movement to attend. He started talking about the other undercover officers from the SDS and the NPORU who were in attendance, as well as commercial spies. When he was asked more questions about that, he suddenly couldn't hear. And, oh, you're freezing. Oh, I can't quite make it out. And we went to a break. So we were all very interested. I did a little video at that point with Evelyn Lubbers, and we were like, oh, can't wait to hear the response to that. You know, that should be very interesting. Completely dropped. Not followed up on whatsoever once we got back from the break. Very frustrating and typical of the approach that was used. Sorry. When we did come back, he talked about what a lovely sight it was, how lots of people didn't attend the workshops. They went for walks. He claims not to remember the involvement of Rosa and Jim Boyling together at this event, which was very blatant by all accounts. He refers to it in his report as a crusty country club. He claimed that people were very critical about the May Day, what happened on May Day. He claims that this event was the beginning and the end of Reclaim the Streets. He himself became the treasurer, which was something which Jim Boyling had previously been. We got to find out that it was actually Jim Boyling's suggestion that Jason Bishop become the treasurer of Reclaim the Streets. He also ended up being the treasurer of Disarmed Dicey. He claimed that his managers thought that him being a treasurer was probably a positive thing, but he didn't seek it out. It just happened to happen that he became treasurer of the groups that he was infiltrating. But it was seen as a positive thing. It would improve his ability to report on people. He claimed he didn't do anything as a treasurer, which I don't think he seemed to understand doesn't absolve him of the fact that he was taking these roles and not doing anything, that is actually an influence on himself. There was very much a characterization of when anything was put to him by an activist, by someone who spied on about some event. He said, I don't dispute it if that's what they're saying. I don't recall it myself, but I don't dispute it. He claimed not to remember much at all, Ben.
Yeah, so the other role that he apparently took, which he doesn't seem to remember too much about and plays down the significance of, was the mail czar, which, as we understand it, was to be the person who was responsible to go and pick up the post for Reclaim the Streets from the PO box, which continued to be advertised as the address, the postal address for Reclaim the Streets for, I think, into like 2005 or something ridiculous, well after RTS had kind of fizzled out. And he was asked whether that was interception, because it's a crime to interfere with the Royal Mail, which he said it wasn't. He doesn't remember collecting it. He said he thought it was a short-term thing and that the mail was collected from somewhere else. We know it wasn't, because we find the RTS literature with the address on it, and they used the PO box rather than have to constantly move it from wherever the new office was. So it begs the question: if he wasn't collecting it, what happened to that mail? Who read it, if anyone? Who collected it, if anyone? And if no one collected it, it's the same as interception. It's like it wasn't received by the person it was intended for.
He was really adamant about the fact that he definitely didn't intercept any mail, and that such a suggestion would be completely beyond the pale. He wouldn't even consider intercepting the mail. This was clearly a man who knows the offence that's tied up in that.
But bear in mind that the job of mail person for Reclaim the Streets, literally, you have assumed the task of intercepting the mail, in the sense that either he has to go and get the mail. And I guess he could deliver it unopened to somebody else, but that's probably not what the job actually involved. The job would involve opening the mail and seeing whether there was any need to respond to it. If a genuine activist did that job, you would go, you'd pick up the mail, you'd open it, and you'd make sure that it was acted upon. So either he did that or he didn't. But either way, he's interfering. It's like that's like he either didn't do the job and interfered with the ability of RTS to communicate with the outside world, or he did it and he was intercepting the mail.
Yeah.
And he did the same thing with Disarmed Dicey as well, because I think he was the person who set up our BM box and was collecting the post from that for a while. I think we took over later. I think we might have had a rotor or something, I can't remember. But he definitely, I think it's in one of my notebooks that wasn't shown to him that sort of says that he set it up. He was also a signatory on the disarmed IC bank account. And again, this wasn't actually put to him. It was just like these vague questions around being a treasurer, but the actual questions about why he was a signatory and what that entailed, again, weren't put to him.
Or whether being a signatory of a bank account in a false name is actually a crime as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, then we saw some of his reporting where he was reporting on the intention of people to bring civil actions against the police. He said he saw it as part of his role to report on things like that. We saw his reporting which like kind of contains details of interpersonal disputes between activists and Reclaim the Streets. He doesn't accept that he was ever tasked to disrupt the group and says he wasn't including this information as in order for it to be used to disrupt the group. I mean, the question is asking why is all this stuff included? And it's not just a little bit, there's a lot of this stuff. And it's a theme we see throughout the SDS officers' reporting. He claimed there was a distinction between his raw reports and the process reports. We've shown some examples. He says that the process reports have a sneering tone, and there's a difference for his own. We've shown some of his own, and he accepted they seem to have a similar style. It was quite funny, sort of a bit that. He claimed that he didn't despise Reclaim the Streets, but in fact he had a very strong affection for Reclaim the Streets. He says that the reason that the Reclaim the Streets ended was they were policed out of existence. He was asked about his drug taking, and it was put to him that he wasn't just an occasional drug taker, that he was a very heavy user of cannabis. And he was, oh yes, I was. He was asked where he got it from. He said, well, I bought it, and I smoked it all the time. He practically said, I love the ganja, me bruv. I mean, it was a bit like, it was almost like that. It was very strange. There was another breach. There was a bunch of stuff at the end of the day I wasn't allowed to report on. So I haven't got it in front of me. There was a bunch of other things said, and that was the end of the first day of questioning of Jason Bishop. Does anybody want to comment on that first day? We'll get back to Jason Bishop when he returns on Thursday. But does anybody want to add about the Monday questioning?
Just to jump in on the drugs thing, it was a complete open goal for any lawyer to just ask him, when did you stop being a heavy weed smoker? And that's going to open the door to all sorts of things. Never asked. And so he's got no inclination to answer it either. Did he continue with his drug use after he came out of the SDS? Where was he procuring it from? Was it coming from illegal street suppliers, or was it coming through police channels?
Or did he get it from the same guy he was getting the DVDs off? Evidence room.
And he also accepted that.
But also, if he was smoking, as I was going to say, if he's still smoking drugs after he's left the police, that's going to affect his vetting. So whatever job he is or is continuing in the police, he's supposed to have vetting. He shouldn't do if he's still smoking drugs.
But he also admitted that it wasn't just like he was having totes of R spliffs, like he was supplying it and he was rolling it. So technically he was like, if you're being legally technical, he was supplying us with drugs as well, which is more than just being an occasional weed smoker. And it's the same with all of this, with the pirate DVDs, with the drug taking, whether it's computer misuse, interference with mail, like all these offences that they're committing to allegedly boost their cover identities, that are worse offences and more serious than a load of the stuff that they're saying that we're doing. And, that hasn't been brought out either, I don't think, properly, because I think that's, is just ridiculous. I mean, I don't have any other words for it, really. But also, just in terms of so at the end of the first day, we got up to, I think we were just up to the year 2000. We were like 2 years into a 7-year deployment. And we all knew that, like, originally they were only going to have him for a day. And we all knew that we weren't going to fit the rest of the questions into half a day. That was all that was allocated. And they refused to budge on that. But it was so obvious when we'd only got through 2 years in one day that it was never going to be satisfactory.
Yeah, it was a ridiculous idea that it could all be done in one day. I mean, this whole idea that it was some sort of an unremarkable deployment that Mitty had come out with, just absolute nonsense. Just to say, there's 65 people watching. Only 5 people have liked it. It's really cringe to ask, but it makes a huge difference to how visible these things are. People are able to like, share, or subscribe, all those, you know, awful things that YouTubers say make a real big difference to how many people watch this broadcast. I will be editing this broadcast and turning it into a podcast that's audio only that will come out in a week or so. I've only just got round to finishing the last one, which was released on the podcast feed this morning. So if you didn't watch last week's video, you can now listen to it in an hour and a half as opposed to sit through 3 hours. Okay, so it was pressing on because we're nearly up to an hour and we really want to try and keep this broadcast not being too long. So on Tuesday, we heard from Donna Mclean, who was deceived into a long-term sexual relationship by the undercover officer, Carlo Soracchi. It was only the morning that was broadcast. The afternoon session was subject to restriction order, though we had a small section after that as well. Donna had the very good sense, instead of having to fill in the witness statement for the inquiry, here's a tip for anybody else who's going to appear at the inquiry, she wrote a book and published it and was able to submit that as her evidence. I'd recommend, if you are able to write a book about your experiences before you appear at the inquiry, it will probably make the experience a bit easier for you. If you haven't read the book, please do. If anybody's got one lying around in front of them, please show it on screen. It is available in all good bookshops and plenty of bad ones as well, I'm sure. We started the day with Mitty exclaiming, "I have the book!" I don't know whether he got a free copy through the inquiry. You'd think with the budget they probably could afford to buy him one, but you'd think he'd buy his own. So Donna started off by saying that she didn't consider herself an activist in the late 90s. She was a trade union rep, and she got involved in the anti-war movement. She described herself as a socialist, but she wouldn't have considered herself to be part of the extreme left wing in London. She worked with Dan Gilman, who also gave evidence to the inquiry not so long ago, and she'd been close friends with him through work. She didn't know Joe Batty as well as she knew Dan Gilman, but their work crossed over, and she was also in trade unionism. She met Steve Headley through Soracchi. So though she met him first when Dan Gilman was dropping off some boxes at her house. Her first proper meeting with Soracchi was on the large Stop the War March in 2003. Not the large one, the one before that, 2002. But then she went on a number of demonstrations with him. So yes, it was the 28th of September 2002. She'd gone with trade union friends but couldn't find them. She spotted Gilman, and Soracchi was with him, and ended up spending the day with them. Afterwards, they went for drinks, they went for dinner, they went for more drinks. At the end of the night, they went back to her flat, stayed together, and had sex. He stayed the next night after going home and getting some fresh clothes. And pretty much the relationship started almost immediately. His version of events is that he was expecting a one-night stand, but that she kept contacting him. He couldn't remember if they had sex or not that first night, and claims that they'd been drinking heavily. She dismissed that, pointing out he'd gone home, come back again, that actually hadn't been drinking that heavily, and they'd gone for food. So he for the duration and majority of the relationship, he stayed at her flat all the time. She once stayed at his, but mostly at hers. She felt that he was a very loving and caring person, that he fitted in with her family, her friendship circle, with her work colleagues. She's very categoric. She would have never had a sexual relationship with him if she'd known that he was an undercover police officer. He accepts this as being, it would have been unlikely that she would have, which an offensive thing we've heard from so many of the officers, like disputing this particular fact. So he claimed he got into a relationship with Donna because his mother had died recently and that she gave him some solace, which was gross. He said that she wasn't an activist, but was just friends with a lot of the activists he was targeting, and she gave him some credibility. Donna says that if they didn't go out, then Carlo would cook every night. He loved cooking. She never had to do it. The relationship seemed to fall into place. He met her family very quickly. He gave up his flat soon after and officially moved in with her. He would tell her that he loved her every day. She got the impression the relationship would last forever. She was in love with him. He brought up the monogamy and said it was very important to him. She agreed. She was not in the habit of any other kind of relationship. They would socialize together a lot. with people from his target group, as well as every other aspect of her life. He connected with all her friends and with her family. He claims that he didn't spend that much time with her. That it was only on occasion. I've just seen that. That it was an occasional thing before moving in, which she disputes. He says that Donna says she and Carlo had sex every day. They never used condoms. He claims that they did. She said that was a lie. He would buy her jewelry. He would buy other gifts. He was very generous. They went within the first 6 weeks of the relationship. They went away together on a holiday. They moved in together after a conversation in Scotland whilst they were visiting her mother. If anybody wants to jump in on any of this stuff, please do. I'm just kind of going through what I reported on the day, and it'd be great to hear other people's voices on what was said. So Carlo broke down crying when he told Donna about the fact that he had what he claimed was an estranged child, and this is what led to them moving in together, to him moving in with her. He was added to the electoral register. She talks a lot about the various holidays they went on, particularly early in the relationship, where they went up to Scotland for her sister's graduation, and because of her gran had just died. He really integrated himself into her family and with her old friends. They'd already spoken to him on the phone very, very quickly. All her family were very happy about the fact that she'd found someone, and he was treated as part of the family. She never met any of his family. She knew that his father was living outside Bologna, but they didn't visit. She was really keen to meet him. In fact, they went to Bologna together, but it never did actually meet him. She talked about all the nice things they'd done, the romantic trip to Bologna, about going to Whitby for her birthday, meeting her family there. It was halfway between where they lived in Scotland and where she was in London. How they all stayed together, how generous and protective he was. She talked about how when they were planning the funeral for her grandmother, that he helped pick up the gravestone. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't going to say much in this section because I wasn't able to follow Donna's evidence. But just listening to what you're saying, I mean, one of the things that really, really strikes me is that, this is a relationship. She wasn't involved in the group that he was spying on. She was friends with people who were. But, this is essentially, he has just picked a member of the public and inveigled his way into her life. And I mean, we're seeing all the same patterns that we see, like, with the other undercover cops. And these are the patterns that, for me, make it really clear that, this was a tactic, so they use these traumatic family stories like the estranged child to create this emotional closeness. And they very quickly get involved with, whatever is important in people's lives. And I can kind of see with Donna that was very similar to Mark Kennedy with me, that I'm very close to my family, and she evidently was as well. And so he gets very close to her family very quickly, and there's just no compunction at all. There is no sense of how invasive that is. And we're going to hear from Soracchi next week, and I'm sure he's going to be asked a lot of questions about this, but just it makes my skin crawl. The idea that they would help someone pick out somebody's grandmother's gravestone, like it's just so intrusive. It's so awful.
Horrific. Donald, did you want to?
But yeah, like part of it goes back. He's not the first one. Like going back to Andy Davey. His coming up with "I'm adopted" as a way of vehicle his way into Jessica's life. It's almost, this is a bit of tradecraft that the inquiry is not really pulling out sufficiently. That it is a tactic to come up with these stories and get sympathy, and
I think
use
it's
it as
really
a way
important.
of fending off questions about the family, but also how disturbing it is to the people on the other end.
And I think it's really important to say that these stories aren't true. Like, I don't know whether that really gets across, but, you know, you have it with John Dines claiming that his mother had died. You have it with Mark Kennedy claiming that his father abandoned them when they were kids, and you know, he grew up in a broken home. And, like, Andy Cole's being adopted, like, all of these traumatic stories. And there's worse ones. I mean, you know, when you hear about what's his name, Thompson, talking about the nasty stories of, like, child sexual abuse, and, you know, they're not true. They are cynically manufactured lies that are supposed to get emotional closeness from people. You know, it is very much a kind of tactic of emotional manipulation to come up with an upsetting story from your past, which you then reveal and create closeness by. It really winds me up. But yeah, it's something that you see over and over and over again with these officers, and particularly in the relationships. But I suspect that, you know, they were doing it outside of the intimate relationships. It's just that where the stories really hit home was with the people who really cared for them.
Yeah, he told Donna's mother that they were they wanted to have a baby. Something that Donna felt was a bit of a concern because they didn't have a permanent home together yet. But they were working on that. He denies ever saying that he encouraged Donna to have a baby with him. He played down the relationship to 14 months. Donna pointed out it was 2 years and 2 months. And he talked consistently about having 3 children in front of his whole family. There's a large number of photos of him with her whole family. She often took the photos, so he's in them and she's not, but sometimes they're them together. They went to Cornwall with Dan Gilman and Dan Gilman's partner. So Dan Gilman's partner's mother was very ill, and Carlo was always very keen to volunteer to help and offered to drive down to there. They used the opportunity to go to restaurants and do tourist stuff on the trip. And we heard about the 2002 New Year's Eve party at her flat, where in front of 20 friends, Carlo proposed to Donna. Just before midnight, in front of the whole party, he went down on one knee, proposed, picked her up, swirled around, then suggested phoning her mother. He then spoke to her mother on the phone about the proposal. It was common knowledge amongst her friends and family. People sent cards. He said that he wasn't going to let her help pick the ring out. He said that wasn't traditional. As an Italian, he was going to get her best friend to help him do the shopping for the ring. That same night, he suggests to Joe Batty, Dan Gilman, and Steve Hadley to go and firebomb a nearby charity bookshop that he claims is owned by a fascist. Donna didn't hear any of that, only learned about it later on. Yeah, I mean, this whole incident is a really key part of what we expect Carlo Soracchi to be questioned on next week when he does appear. Turns out that the photographs of his supposedly estranged son, along with photos of his sister, his dad, and his mum, were actually real photos of those people. In fact, he used their real names, which is quite disgusting. It turns out that whilst deployed, whilst in a relationship with Donna, that his wife had a second child. That his own family, as he was suggesting to Donna that they should have a child, he actually did have a child with his wife in his real life. He told Donna that he was working really hard to try and build a relationship with his son. He claimed they lived in Cornwall, and he started spending one weekend a month there. He would call her regularly when he was away. He was actually going to visit his wife and family, who actually lived fairly nearby where his deployment was. She asked the question, why was he taking such a risk of infiltrating in a scene which was so close to his real life? He talked about his sister, who was older than him, who had 2 children in Peterborough, used her real name, would claim that she was very depressed in a very unhappy marriage. Turns out none of that was true. She questioned really why on earth he did this. To apologise. They were due to go on holiday again to watch the Tour de France. Sorry. Sorry.
Tom, your audio is gone.
Yeah, I was coughing my guts up. That's why. Sorry. They were due to go to France and to watch the Tour de France, but the day before, he claimed his father had a stroke and that they would have to cancel. So it was around this time that his cover job had been that he was a locksmith, but then he changed it to that he was importing Italian food, which meant that he was away more often as he was going away to collect this Italian food and bring it back to the UK. Over Christmas 2003, he went back to Italy to supposedly visit his ill father. Sorry, I do apologise.
Tom, your audio's up again.
Sorry. So I keep turning it off because I'm coughing so much and no one wants to hear that. But yeah, so over that Christmas, he went away to Italy to supposedly visit his ill father. He was meant to come back for the New Year's. He didn't end up coming back for the New Year's because he rang in to say that his father had died. This meant he didn't come back for some time, and then he came back with the story that we heard from Joe Batty when he was giving evidence a couple of weeks ago, that supposedly at his father's funeral, his sister had come forward and to say that he had been his sister had said that she was sexually abused by their father, and this supposedly had this huge effect on him. Obviously, this wasn't true, and this is part of the whole use of trauma. So he used this to explain his depression. He was very different when he came back. He looked haggard and disheveled. He was much less affectionate and loving. He said that he felt he couldn't touch her. But he repeatedly still said that he loved her. She talked about how concerned she was for him. He was very specific about the abuse, really quite gross. I'm not going to repeat it now. If someone else wants to talk about it, feel free. I don't particularly want to. But yeah, I mean, it's really incredibly gross details of the supposed sexual abuse that his sister suffered at the hands of their father. I mean, Donna says this is one of the cruelest things, really, is to make up this kind of story and in order to get people to empathise with them. And she talks about how cruel it was, how evil, how completely untrue, just appalling. He told Dom he wanted to move out. She told him she didn't want him to. And then she got home one day and he'd taken everything of his, including all the furniture that he'd brought, and the flat was now half empty. And he'd gone to a lot of effort to make the home really nice, and it was a real shock to discover it with everything missing. She talked about how quickly that he formed a close bond with her, speaking to her own experiences of trauma, and causing her to have huge level of empathy for him. And then 2 weeks after he'd moved out, he reappeared in her life, started seeing what to sort things out. They started spending 2 or 3 times a week together. He was romantic. The relationship became sexual again. But there was a bit of a distance. She felt quite sad about the situation. She felt uncared for by him. He would tell her that he loved her. They were having sex. He'd buy her gifts, but it was she spent a lot of time confronting him about this devastating abuse that existed within, supposedly, it existed. This had a huge impact on her mental state. She talked about how it was exploitation and manipulation. She last saw him in November 2004. They went to an art house cinema to see some Italian art house cinema together. He put her in a taxi and threw the fare money at her. It felt really off and dismissive. He said he wasn't feeling it. And then he sent her an email saying he moved on. She talked about how shattering it was. They emailed a bit, but she sent him an email asking for tips for holiday in Italy. He wasn't at all helpful. I'm just going to play a short clip. I've got the right one.
Fabricated.
Sorry.
That chunk of your life, of my life, was completely fabricated. So I spent quite a large portion of my time with someone who didn't actually exist at all.
They've inadvertently created quite a force to be reckoned with. Everyone thinks this was years ago as well, you know. It started years ago, but it happened for 50 years. We know of cases, you know, just a few years ago. So this is not an historic injustice. This is now.
Sorry. I just got to keep coughing. That's why I keep putting myself on mute. So it's Lindsey as well as Donna you heard on that clip. I didn't realise they were both together. Yeah, she, like Donna talks about finding out in 2015 when she some friends got in touch. She believed them like, pretty much straight away. They talked about it as an established fact. I'm just going to play another clip of hers.
Before, Donna, those are all the questions that I have for you in a public hearing.
Okay.
Before we break, is there anything else in public that you would like to say to the chair of the inquiry?
I think one of the things that I do want to say, and I do want to say it in public because it affects so many people, is that, you know, we talk a lot about the events, and we talk about the sexual relationships, and we talk about what happened and who was affected. But I think there's also this massive, massive problem about taking away people's autonomy. It's a kind of theft. And I think as a woman, and as, you know, I don't want to speak for the other women, but I feel this, that our bodily autonomy was stolen from us. And not just in the fact that we did not give consent, but also the time that we chose to have children, whether we have children, how difficult that became, you know, the relationships that we ended up in, the issues of trust that came for that. And that spans your whole life. It doesn't stop. You know, there's the period of the relationship itself. There's the period when you find out. There's the aftermath. There's, you know, doing all of this stuff, which is quite difficult. But the entire autonomy of your own body has been stolen in a way that was strategic. And I think that's something I just want to kind of highlight as an overarching thing.
Yeah, that was like kind of the summing up statements was just before the further questions. What we got in further questions was a very interesting little detail about when he moved in with Donna. Carlo Soracchi claimed that he was paying rent, and in fact, he produced a rent book for the office to see that he was supposedly giving Donna, or whoever he was supposedly paying, £685 a month for the flat. Donna had never seen this before. It included signatures of hers, which were clearly not hers. They were all very different. It also included signatures of her landlord, who was living in America at the time, someone that she never met. Very clearly a forgery. She was actually paying £320 a month rent, and Carlo was not contributing to that. So he was claiming £685 a month. Interestingly, for the full 2 years, of the relationship, he was claiming for it. He said in his statement that he was only with her for 14 months, yet in his rent book, there's a full 2 years, 23 months included. It's very clear that he was forging and defrauding his employers out of that rent money. And I mean, I think this is, it would be bloody weird if that was something he came up with by himself, and that nobody was aware that he was secretly doing that. I'm reminded of something very similar that was presented when Belinda Harvey was questioned about Bob Lambert, with him claiming that he was paying rent. And it also came up with Joe Batty when Carlo Soracchi was staying at his residence about rent. It seems very clear that the undercover officers were doing this as a matter of course. Emily?
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out that this was a document that wasn't disclosed to Donna. So again, with these problems with disclosure, when we're not getting everything that we should be getting, this was something that should have been in her bundle that she saw for the first time while she was giving evidence, which has been a horrific theme. But as it was in this case, it was, it actually, her response was so shocked and so genuine, and there is absolutely no way that there is there wouldn't be from our side anyway, obviously, any doubt in what Donna said. But in terms of Mitting and the inquiry, seeing that reaction to the document for the first time as well was really, really important.
Just a comment saying that I might have been wrong about the 23 months. It might have only been 9. That to be honest with you, I can't remember. It's what I put in my notes at the time. So if I was wrong then it's wrong. But that's what I wrote at the time. So I'm not sure actually with it, because obviously we didn't see any visuals on the broadcast. We'll have to follow up on that one. But I'm sure we will get the full chapter and verse when Carlo Soracchi is being questioned next week. Does anybody else want to comment on Donna's day of evidence at the inquiry? Donald? You're on mute. Donald, you're on mute.
It's worth emphasizing just how much surprise and shock that came across in the evidence, and this is why it's so important that we have live evidence. Is like it really made the whole thing ring true, and it wasn't just that he was getting money; he was forging her signature. He was forging her landlord's signature ineptly. He didn't even get the landlord's name right. So we've got a very amateur criminal going on, but one who knew he was being totally backed by the Metropolitan Police. He knew he was never going to be called out about this, even if he was caught.
Tolerated.
I think it's worth tying it in as well. What we'll come to in Lindsey stuff about the evidence of the holiday. He was on a jaunt. He knew it. His managers knew it.
Yeah.
And I think, panning out a bit, you see towards this, it's kind of getting into this tranche, and these officers who were in around 2000, 2001, they're criminal minds. James Thompson was a criminal mind long before he ever became an undercover officer. And it's kind of the culmination of this vicious cycle where the worst of the officers, the worst fantasists, the ones that played the system the most, ended up in management. And
you've got to wonder to what degree the management were in on the rent book fraud, for example, because they certainly appear to have been in on all expenses paid, jollies, when they appear to have been, that it wasn't a genuine. Evelyn, your mic is on.
Evelyn.
Where was I? Oh yeah, the managers seem to be in on the scam of all expenses paid overseas deployments when there was no real operational need. So I certainly wouldn't put it past them for them to be like, we can claim, you can claim this, just fill in, provide some paperwork and there's some extra money in it for you. I mean, those are again kind of questions that aren't being put yet. Did your managers know? That will hopefully come up in the next tranche.
And I mean, in terms of the management jollies, I was particularly struck, and it will come up with the holiday, but the number of occasions where we've seen that managers have gone on holiday with these officers, but not even to the same city. And I'm getting noise from somewhere.
Yeah, it's a common problem. I don't know if everybody hears it every time, but it's just because people who haven't got headphones. Just keep talking. I'll try and clean it up afterwards.
Okay. So the example of the holiday, which we will come to in Lindsey's evidence, where he goes on holiday to Venice, and his manager also goes to Italy, but his manager's in Verona. And it's not just the officers who were making the most of these all expenses paid jaunts.
We've had a comment from Donna thanking me, but I think it extends to everybody, and suggests that I should write a book. I will not be writing a book, just for the record. I ain't got time for that shit. I live in the moment, as people may be able to tell by the way I do these things. Does anybody else want to add anything about Donna's evidence from Tuesday, Evelyn?
Cool. Yeah, there's a few things about, for instance, about the rent book. It makes you, it went so easy, apparently. He could just, come up with some rent and got it reimbursed. Do we know whether that happened before and with other people, other undercovers who went, I think, specifically the ones who lived with the women they had a relationship with? They may have said that, like this entire story with Jenna, who drew a map of the house he lived in and puts Alison as his landlady. That might have been one of a similar scheme. And
Jenna was questioned about that, like he was trying to hide the fact that he was in a relationship with her from his managers. So, that he was trying to make out that it was a communal house with separate bedrooms. And
but on second thought,
actually, it makes more sense that he was submitting that as part of a rent scam.
Yeah, and also we have to look, Lambert went, lived with several women, and they may have pulled the same scheme. Yeah. And there's something else that I wanted to say. There was a short part where the evidence was given was really private, and Donna says, like, we don't want to be ghosted over completely, but it really had to be private because it was so awful and she didn't want the whole world to know about it. But it's not like she wanted to keep anything secret, but it was just too bad to talk about it in public. That's what she wanted to have said. That's it.
Okay, yeah. So does anybody else want to add anything about Donna's evidence on Tuesday? If not, we'll move on to Lindsey on Wednesday. Oh, you, Carolyn? You're on mute. Carolyn, you're still on mute. Oh, you're not on mute anymore, but we can't hear you. I can't. Can other people hear Carolyn? Okay. See if we can remove you and add you again. Does that help? Nope. No, it seems we've got some technical problems there with Carolyn. Maybe we can find some way to. So a couple of other people have joined us as well. We're joined by Zoe and Dave Morris. We're both here. I don't know. Do either of you want to say something about what we heard from Donna on Tuesday?
Not at the moment.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It doesn't. Am I audible? I would.
Yes. Yep.
Am I audible?
Yes. Can you not hear us?
Sorry, late. Yeah, I can hear you now. So one thing that struck me, really been sitting with me, is about New Year's party and the fact that went out with people from the party and then talked about this firebombing. And then my understanding is it was sort of after that he proposed. and it's almost as if it was a distraction from them coming back to the party and going, bloody hell, did you hear what Carlo was trying to do? And almost like it does a way of stopping that becoming the conversation. And that just seemed so cynical to me. If I'd got that the right way around, he kind of used a proposal cover for having realised he'd ballsed up by inviting people to do firebombing who really weren't. Yeah, the main thing that's struck with me.
So just to read out what Carolyn was trying to say and we couldn't hear, is about the fact that the inquiry hasn't really given an overview of the expenses claimed. And I think this is quite a big issue. I mean, I've certainly seen with Kennedy, I've seen examples where he's quite clearly claiming expenses for taking women on a date or for buying people gifts. And I mean, it comes up later with Emily as well, that what we're not seeing is whether they were claiming expenses for all of these things, which give a very, very clear indication to whoever is doing the accounting of exactly what those officers are up to. You know, whether it's claiming expenses on the house where they live alone with another woman, or whether it is or whether they were claiming all that weed they were smoking on expenses. I think there's a lot to be said. We've heard about overtime, but we've heard very little about the accounting and expenses that went on in the background. And bear in mind, this is the Metropolitan Police, and they probably were bean counting. And Mark Kennedy certainly kept all his receipts. It was like one of those things, along with constantly being on the telephone, he was always keeping receipts, and he would take receipts from other people for his tax return. And presumably he was also claiming those things that other people had paid for on his expenses.
So moving to Wednesday then, with Lindsey. So Lindsey was was deceived into a relationship by the undercover officer Carlo Soracchi before Donna. So this was between May 2001 and April 2002. She had been an active member of the Socialist Party in the past, but by this time in her life she was no longer quite so active. She was still a member of the trade union and still friends with a lot of people who were members of the Socialist Party. She'd moved from Liverpool down to London and had connected with them there. But she says she certainly wasn't politically active in a way that she had been previously in life, though politics had always remained a major part of her life for a very long period of time. And that always stays with you. She says that Soracchi appeared to be discovering politics in his 30s. She found it very endearing at the time. He had a very rudimentary approach to politics. She expanded on her politics about how she takes personally people being deliberately kept poor and subject to poverty. She still attended large demonstrations in the 2000s on a range of topics. Carlo Soracchi claims that she was anti-politics at the time. She rejects that entirely and points out that he managed to avoid 2 misconduct hearings by claiming that he didn't have sex with activists. So by saying that she was anti-politics, he could maintain that lie. So that would make sense. She was still involved very much with Youth Against Racism in Europe, with the Workers' Beer Company fundraising at festivals during that time period. She met Soracchi through her friends in the Socialist Party. She was friends with Joe Batty in the early 2000s, also friends with his partner. She was friends with Alfred and Mario. So there was a group of friends that really liked Soracchi. She talked about how that he had presented himself to them as being someone who was unhappily single. And as such, people had been like kind of looking to introduce him to people who are also single who might want to go on dates. So she met him in the Samuel Pepys pub on its last night. So the Samuel Pepys pub was next door to Hackney Town Hall, and there was an incredibly positive mood that night, as lots of people who had attended the last night at the pub sort of milled round outside in the square in front of the town hall. The Hackney Council at the time was planning a whole series of cuts, which were very unpopular, and that with such a large crowd outside the town hall, some people took the spontaneous decision to occupy the town hall. She said that she went in herself to use the toilet. She's witnessed people kind of knocking things off desks and so on. We were shown the report by Soracchi of the occupation of the town hall. It's from May 2001. It claims that some sort of unholy alliance of the Socialist Party, Class War, the Wombles, and various others had done a pre-planned occupation. She says that's not how she remembers it. Also, the Independent Working Class Association and the SWP working together, various other things that don't sound particularly credible. So Lindsey was with Carlo that evening. He claims that there was confrontation with uniformed police, and this was frequent. She said, yeah, they were all struck by batons and pepper sprayed by the police. She was not seriously injured, but was seriously shaken. She talked about the imbalance of police aggression. She said she wouldn't have been interested in a relationship with him if it wasn't for his political interest. She points out that he was no form of physical beauty. She talked about a time when she was at a party when a man with no social skills was accused by him of being a police informant who should be thrown out. She talked about how uncomfortable that made her. She said that they went on a date together. She was due to go to work on a night shift on the 25th of May 2001, but she lost her job because she didn't go, because instead she went home with Soracchi. She says she feels she instigated the start of the sexual aspect of the relationship. She says she just wanted a bit of fun and picked up on the social cues from him that he was interested. He said that he grew on her and that he appeared at her surprise birthday party in Liverpool as a treat for her. He started telling her he loved her and that he'd never met anyone like her before. In his Operation Hearn interview, he claimed that she was an activist from Liverpool who wanted to have a relationship with him. He says it was very much the other way around, a complete work of fiction. She points out how he deliberately conflated the various relationships he deceived women into, as well as putting in outright lies to muddy the waters. Soracchi admits to regularly staying at her flat overnight. They would spend large amounts of time with activist friends in pubs and at parties. Lindsey points out as the relationship continued, they spend more time alone. She'd see him in social situations, as well as meeting up one-on-one for sex and all the other things that couples do. She said they always paid for things 50-50. She's not the kind of person who expect to be paid for. She said she didn't stay in his flat in Hackney because it was grim, but he did provide her with keys for it very early on, as what felt like a gesture at the time. She didn't give him keys to her flat because it was an expensive flat and the keys were expensive, and she just didn't have. There was a fob, and she just didn't give him one. But he gave one to her. So he claims the relationship was a one-night stand that developed into casual sex on a number of occasions. She points out that was multiple times a week for over a year. He claims they always used contraception. She points out she has a latex allergy, and she used the natural method, avoiding penetration during fertile times of the month. He never used contraception and wasn't interested in it. He would tell her that he loved her very often. She would reciprocate. They were very physically tactile and physically very close. He used to be the abiding memory was someone very warm, very gentle, not afraid to be emotionally vulnerable. She was taken aback when he said that he loved her. She said it was far too soon, really. And it was an outrageous and cruel thing to make her trust him and bring her barriers down. I've got a little clip from here now.
Very serious relationship. So he worked really hard over a series of months to actually get me to open up, to drop me barriers and to trust him.
Yeah, she talked about how he would make some really beautiful, heartfelt gestures in terms of, and was very generous with gifts. We were shown a handwritten card he gave her on her birthday in 2001. He gave her like an SLR camera. The cards, there was like lots of love, kisses, and all that other stuff. We were shown like a number of cards from him. He would clearly spend a fair bit of money on these gifts. So they're really thoughtful, made her feel really loved. He claims in his statement that it was just a fling. She points out that she came to love him and believed that he loved her. She says by the time the relationship ended, she left the entire social circle, was left her isolated, so damaged was she by the end of the relationship. She points out that, he had a wife and son throughout the entirety of the deployment. This is just the typification of misogyny. It really should be a criminal offence for police officers to treat members of the public like that. He told her about his family in Bologna as well, showing photos of them, as well as photos of his son. She never met any of them. He told her about his sister, using their all real names, claiming the sister was depressed in a very unhappy marriage. He never told her the story of his sister being sexually abused by their father, as he did to a number of others. He did tell her a lot of details about the estranged relationship with the son, claimed a volatile relationship with the ex-partner, but that it wasn't his fault, it was very much her fault. He expressed a lot of emotion about the lack of contact with his son. He asked her to keep it secret, the fact that he had a son. She pointed out that the sharing of confidential information with her made her feel much closer to him. And she really encouraged him to reconnect with his estranged son. We've since discovered the stories are not true, but the names of these people is all completely real. She talked about hearing from Neil Woods, the undercover officer who infiltrated criminal gangs, about weaponizing empathy. And she said that is exactly what Soracchi did to her. He claims that he did not infiltrate the lives of family members of the women he deceived into sexual relationships, but was also admitting that he did in fact meet her family as well as all her close friends. She talked about the time he came up to Liverpool and it was and surprised her on her surprise birthday party, how it was a turning point in the relationship. Got very close to an old friend of hers who gave her bed for the night to the pair of them. We heard about this trip that they went on to Venice. She considered it a really special trip. She was quite overwhelmed by this fairly short notice trip to Venice, which he paid for. He claims in the statement that the trip was paid for by the SDS, and she paid for herself, and they travelled separately. She rejects that. He claims the trip to Venice was with members of the Socialist Party and no platform to meet extreme Italian anarchists over there. She rejects that as well. So it's very much just the two of them on a romantic trip. We were shown the authorization. Supposedly it was part of a Socialist Party delegation. Lindsey couldn't be clearer. They didn't meet anyone. They stayed at a beautiful flat in the centre of Venice. We saw lots of photos of what was clearly a romantic weekend together. She said that Carlo withdrew at one point during the trip and she left him alone for 20 minutes in the market. When she returned to him, he was on the phone saying, "She's not here. She's pissed off with me, mate." This made her feel awful. Obviously, at the time, making international calls on a mobile phone was incredibly expensive. She now believes he was on the phone to his cover officer, DS Beale, who was in Verona at the time. Asked about the end of the relationship, she said she used to have daily contact with him, but as it came towards the end, he became uncontactable for 4 days. She got really worried as she went around to his flat in the middle of the night because she hadn't heard from him. She found that, in fact, even though he'd been given keys, she had been given the keys for the deadlock, and it was deadlocked. When he reappeared after 4 days, he claimed his football mate was having a crisis and he'd been helping him. This made her feel like, he's such a good person. She was concerned about him, but she'd been settled down by that story. He claimed his mother was unwell and then blurted out during an argument that she was dying. She felt awful that she'd been pushing him on this matter. She made a note about the time she went to his flat in the night. She got very, very emotional actually during this. She got very, very upset.
I was about to say that. I mean, when we're talking about the officers, it's easy to kind of have quite a lot to say about it, and these accounts where the women give their personal evidence, it's much harder to kind of talk about them. I mean, Lindsey, what I would encourage people to listen to the women themselves, because obviously, like, Tom's rundown is shorter, but there was so much emotion in what Lindsey had to say, both, I mean, on both sides, really. Like, she made me cry, but she also made me laugh quite a lot through the course of her evidence. And I think, yeah, I think for these recaps are much better when we're trying to recap on the officers, and we have much more to comment on. Whereas I feel that the real value of the testimony of people like Donna and Lindsey actually is in what they said themselves. So I would encourage people to drop in and listen, even if it's only to parts of it, really.
Years ago, but they've inadvertently created quite a force to be reckoned with. Everyone thinks this was years ago as well, you know. It started years ago, but it happened for 50 years. We know of cases, you know, just a few years ago. So this is not an historic injustice. This is now.
She talked about the end of the relationship, about how he went from being very over the top about professions of love for her to just being friends for the mo comments, about how confusing and emotionally conflicting it was. She kept getting mixed messages from him. She felt like she was being kept on the back burner by him until she went to Joe Batty's 40th birthday and saw him there with Donna. She found it quite upsetting and left early. She ended up isolating herself from the friendship group. Thankfully, she reconnected with him many years later, but after he disappeared for good. But it was really had a horrible impact on her. She was asked how it made her feel finding out that he was an undercover officer in 2015. She broke down crying again, talking about the effect on her, about the effect on her young son, about the fact that she was so sleep deprived and wasn't there for him like she should be. It was really, really upsetting to see. She said there's no excuse for any of these things that the undercover officer did. She wants to see him answer for it, but she wants the managers. It's more important that the managers answer for it, and who the ones who did the authorizations and requested the tasking, and the politicians who thought the intelligence from SDS officers was worthwhile without taking into consideration the effect of the deployment. She was very clear this was rape, and she will continue to campaign with Police Spies Out of Lives to change the law on the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act, which allows this rape to continue. She talked about, she got very emotional. It was very emotional about paying tribute to Police Spies Out of Lives, Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, the Undercover Research Group, Monitoring Group, Blacklist Support Group, and all those who campaign against undercover police. She talked about the targeting of trade unions, about the mischaracterization of the way they presented that, how it was all feeding into vetting, called its proper name of blacklisting, the dehumanizing language of the Tradecraft Manual. She called him a low-rent Bob Lambert, the parallels between his deployment and Lambert's deployment. She called for John Mitting to find that these units were institutionally sexist and institutionally misogynistic. She's just giving them the set, saying they've already been found to be institutionally racist and institutionally corrupt. Mitting came back on this one, and I'm just going to add that now.
May I say this to you so that you and others are not disappointed, and so that the wider world can understand it? That what the wider world hears, and what you hear on the audio and video link, or if you're here in person, what you hear in person, is the open side of undercover policing. There was a closed side, which will have to remain closed, and might, if everyone knew about it, put matters in a slightly different perspective. Doesn't, of course, justify a lot of the things that you and I have heard about on the open side.
I actually, not having seen the closed evidence, obviously, I actually think that evidence, if the goal is to allay public concern about this widespread abuse, the type of abuse that you condemn if you're talking about another country, a really repressive regime, should be more open, should be public. And, I think the
police and security services constantly harping on about how national security and how things need to be kept from the British public. Personally, I don't subscribe to that point of view. I believe in open government, open communication with the population. That's how a population can truly take part in a democracy, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I obviously haven't seen the material you've seen, so I'm not speaking from full knowledge. I'd like to be speaking from full knowledge. But, yeah, I think governments need to have more faith in the population, that we're not just all going to go and riot and commit crime if we actually are told the truth, rather than be treated like children, you know, to be kept in just only a bit of information is to be...
This is a debate I would be delighted to conduct with you, but not on this occasion, I'm afraid.
Yeah, let's let everyone go home. Yeah, thank you.
And you.
That intervention.
Sorry, just because there's the sound in the background, I just muted you there. That was me. Yeah, I mean, the idea. I mean, like this is just so you know, so incredibly offensive, and it really needs to be highlighted. There you go. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, no, I'll unmute it when she stops.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. We've long known. I mean, we've commented many times that it could be that the majority of the inquiry takes place in secret. We have no idea how long these closed hearings take place for. We hear of some closed hearings, but there's a great deal more that are in secret. They relate to the officers we know about, but they also relate to the officers that we don't even get to discuss. We have no idea what's presented in these sessions, but it is incredibly frustrating that we know nothing of them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we need to really push back on this. I mean, just the night before Mitting made that comment, I was in a conversation with someone where I was talking about the fact that, you know, they are going to say in their final report that while the evidence...
No worries. Yeah, very frustrating. Does anybody else want to come in at all and comment on any of this? Yeah, Emily?
I mean, it was just utterly outrageous. I mean, the inquiry does so many things that makes me angry, but that comment by Mitting just made me furious. Every single one of these officers has been exposed as liars, as frauds. They have done the most despicable things to our lives, and the only reason we know about this is because of us. We don't know about any of this from them. If it was down to them, this would all be in secret. None of this would be known. And every single time there is something new. I mean, even just taking the rent book that we were talking about earlier, you know, now that's suddenly come to light. And there's a whole other area of fraud that needs looking at. There is absolutely no way that there aren't a load of other survivors out there that have stories that can contradict evidence of these officers that we are not hearing from. It's not good enough at this point. And to have the audacity after hearing from so many of them speak, to permitting to turn around and say, oh, you don't know what I know. Oh, there's stuff enclosed, without even thinking that he might now need to be questioning that evidence, and the veracity of what those officers are saying is absolutely disgusting and just shows the inquiry for the sham it is, and why for so many of us we never actually thought we'd get any justice from this inquiry, because there cannot be justice when that is still the attitude that is prevailing from the chair.
I mean, I think it's really important to say that if they had just gone off the police side of the story, and if they hadn't had the civilian witnesses, and some of these civilian witnesses have come along at the absolute last minute because they had no idea, you know, and so we would have had Bob Lambert, the great officer who caught the arsonists and got them sent to prison, rather than Bob Lambert the arsonist. And you know, there would have been James Thompson, was heroically extended his deployment in order to foil the murder plot that he invented. Like, you know, and even, you know, a lot of the stuff that is happening in secret, we're talking about spying on the far right. And, you know, I have absolutely no sympathy for the far right. And I don't doubt that some awful things may have been being done. But I don't think that that means that the SDS reporting about it is going to be any better. I don't think it's going to be any more accurate, and I don't think that they're going to have necessarily behaved any better in their undercover roles just because they were spying on the far right and not on the left. Yeah, basically, unless this evidence is put out there and is open to rebuttal by the people that it is about and by the people that were there, I don't think any store can be put by it. All that we've seen is that they back each other up, they lie, the documents are nonsense. I mean, it's just the idea that Mitting could have seen anything in private that actually counters what we've seen in public, where everything that they have said has been countered by incredibly compelling evidence and you know, just like basic common sense as soon as it's seen the light of day.
It's also worth saying that this closed bit about the far right, if what we've seen is anything to go by, we can be sure that the SDS in the far right haven't foiled shit. They haven't brought anyone to court and prosecuted them. If they did, it was probably a miscarriage of justice. And as much as I don't care if the far right are fitted up and sent to prison, I kind of do on the because I care about justice and I care about the cops, you know, like not being free to make up their own shit and create operations for their own vested interests and political ideologies. So fuck Mitting and fuck him saying that if you only you knew what I know. I mean, like echoes of Yvette Cooper and Palestine Action or what?
I mean, not least as well, the Iraq War, you know. I mean, it's a dodgy dossier all over again.
Yeah. I don't know if people can hear me yet. I totally agree with what you guys have all just said. I thought that was, out of all the things I've ever heard Mitting say, and I've heard him saying a lot of shit, that was one of the most sort of tone-deaf and patronising comments. And I felt really glad that Lindsey kind of had her wits about her and was able to respond in the way that she did, because no one was expecting Mitting to suddenly come out with this. And he tells us, you know, we don't know what's going on in the closed hearings. We're maybe assuming it's the right wing, but we have no idea what sort of deployments or what sort of groups were being targeted and how many closed hearings even take place. I did want to say, I mean,
we know at least one of the closed officers is one of these legendary officers along the lines of HM1 and Bob Lambert.
And I was going to say the other thing I thought Lindsey did really well just before the end of her evidence was she went through a list of things that she thought up the night before, things that she wanted to get across. And I thought it was an excellent list. Obviously, you know, this is all stuff that's been rattling around in her brains for a long time. One of the things she mentioned was wanting to know more about the personal politics of the spy corps and the managers and how much that would have affected their deployments, their targeting, their reporting and their operations. And, you know, again, it's something that the inquiry hasn't bothered exploring, but we've already seen spy corps saying, well, we basically tweaked things to suit us. We had, you know, personal sympathies with certain campaigns, so we didn't report on them so much. We manipulated what was going on. We didn't always report on everything. We picked and choose. That's the sort of thing that would be really interesting to get to the bottom of, but I don't think this inquiry is going to bother trying.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear?
Yes, Dave, go for it. We can hear you perfectly well.
Yeah. So, yeah, that last point, Lois Austin, who was in the witness box for half a day last week, there was
we'll be doing that one next. Yeah.
Issue of when she was she had challenged the kettling of 3,000.
I've got some clips of that I was going to play before we.
Would you want to play the clip first, and I'll come back on that?
We've just been going. Yeah, I'll come to that. Does anybody else, just before we get to that, does anybody else want to react to what Mitting said? Zoe?
mute.
Zoe, you're on mute.
I know. I'm trying to come off. Can you hear? No. Okay. Am I on? Am I on?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you fine. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, all these secret meetings that are completely muted, so we don't know what they're saying in the back behind. I think it was particularly interesting with admitting kind of mute about what should or shouldn't be discussed in this supposedly public inquiry. But part of the way it was, you know, when you're in a meeting and going on too much about stuff that maybe we should discuss, you know, that little symbol, let's talk about this in the pub. And I kind of got the sense maybe he was inviting a conversation taken up about like what should be held in secret. I don't know if there's a way for Lindsey to chase that up when she's recovered from. But yeah, I thought might as well try that as well as everything else, get more into the public. But the other thing that really struck me was with that people are saying about putting that together with the fact that a lot of the witnesses are saying that the ICOPs themselves had really grotty accommodation. And I'm wondering if that's because they're human looking after them. They were left up to themselves to look at these bedsits or whatever they were having. And that's partly why they wanted to move in with women. Maybe also some got cleaners, some of them didn't. I mean, who was doing this accounting, signing off on that rent book? Who was doing the admin? Who was doing the cleaning? I feel like there's this kind of people who were probably employed in or by these units who are not appearing in any way, shape or form. And so I'm thinking about like accountants, secretaries, cleaners, who's making the tea in the safe house, who's looking after the safe house. There's a full level of admin, of practical accounting up that are important, especially in a situation where we're dealing with institutional misogyny, because it is so often women that end in those sorts of roles. And one, be really interested to hear from the cleaners in particular. I mean, I've worked as a tea lady in the city when I was young, and just by being invisible, by being one of those kind of invisible women, just being useful. You know, the invisibilization of women was clearly an issue in this unit. Just heed to the fact that they're ending people's lives, depriving them of bodily, social, cultural, family. Yeah, so there were some other people around, and why have we not heard from it so far is my abiding question. Enclosed. I mean, are they keeping all the tea ladies secret? I don't know.
Any other comments on, I mean, specifically just on what we heard from Mitting or anything else from Lindsey's day of evidence? If not, we'll move on to Thursday, which started with the second appearance of Lois Austin at the undercover policing inquiry. You may remember she did give evidence before we heard from Peter Francis, the whistleblower, who gave evidence last November. And November 13th of November, she gave evidence last. So everything that she was questioned about this time related to the unlawful detention of herself and many others on May Day 2001, the first use of the use of kettling. She brought a case against the Met in 2005, which ran on for quite a while. So herself and 3,000 others were kettled from 2 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. She talks about the carnival atmosphere that existed on the day, about how 6,000 police surrounded the crowd and didn't allow anybody to leave. She had a baby in creche that day, less than 1 year old. She wasn't allowed to leave to collect her. There was no toilet facilities. The police made no provision for anyone with any medical needs. Carlo Soracchi was in the crowd that day. He'd infiltrated the Socialist Party, who were giving out leaflets and selling newspapers. When she brought the case, she was represented by the barrister Keir Starmer, among others, and the police were represented by John Beggs, among others. Regular police watchers will be familiar with the name John Beggs. He is someone who has represented the police in all sorts of occasions, particularly when they've done something absolutely awful. I've seen him make the grieving mother of someone who was killed by the police cry on the dock. I've seen him do some terrible things. He represented the police at Hillsborough. He's the go-to man for when something terrible happens. Before that, he was an animal rights activist. Anyway, so the undercover officer, Carlo Soracchi, briefed John Beggs the night before John Beggs cross-examined Lois Austin as part of the civil case. And when we saw the notes where Beggs asked Soracchi what would wind up Lois Austin. Soracchi told Operation Hearn that the briefing he gave to Beggs was about the character of Lois Austin and what would wind her up. He told her that Lois Austin was a South London girl and gave her a list of things that would wind her up. Lois says the cross-examination was very hostile. The tone of Beggs was trying to discredit her as a witness. There was a lot of anti-Irish racism used. Beggs claims the reason he brought up the presence of Irish people on May 2001 was for forensic reasons. Lois pointed out the judge in the civil case had to speak to John Beggs repeatedly during the hearing. But how terrible the questioning was. But the most important thing was why was it an undercover officer was briefing lawyers for the police, and this was not disclosed at the hearing. Soracchi has given a statement to the inquiry about the briefing of John Beggs. We were shown it. It was just mostly redacted. He claims he didn't pass on any legal professional privilege that he was privy to. He claimed that Lois Austin acted as a spotter for anti-fascist activities. She denies this completely, pointing out she was too busy leading demonstrations and organising and being a spokesperson to ever have that kind of a role. He says in his statement that she was not a violent person. He also knew that she had a baby daughter. Sarah Hemingway, who was doing the questioning, was very irritating, to be honest, during this period. She pointed out to Lois Austin that uniformed police wouldn't be able to know that she wasn't lying about having a baby. She tells Lois that we are not going to relitigate. She talked over Lois just to say that she didn't want to talk over her. Lois Austin rejected the characterization of her as a wild radical. She pointed out that both Soracchi and Peter Francis both say she's not a violent person. She talked about how appalling it was that a Met police officer was briefing a barrister in a civil case for the police. So Beggs claims that he believed that witnesses for Lois Austin were going to purge themselves by denying membership of the Socialist Party. Now, after Sarah Hemingway said that we weren't going to relitigate, it appeared that we were relitigating about the fact that she's membership of the Socialist Party. Lois Austin laughed at the idea she'd ever hide her membership of the Socialist Party. She's been in a leadership position. She's stood in elections. She said, the world and his dog know I'm in the Socialist Party. Sarah Hemingway points out it's more about the other people in the civil case being secretly members, about how many witnesses of the Kettling were Socialist Party members. Lois pointed out if it had been 20 rather than 2, it wouldn't have made any difference to legal strategy. So John Beggs is recorded as saying that he was hoping for some useful information about the nature of the beast. I thought it was very good of Lois Austin not to rise to the fact that John Beggs was calling her a beast. I've got some clips from that. I'll just add those in.
Of course, didn't include the UCO intelligence that the SDS had put forward to feed into the civil litigation.
That's right.
On the 17th of January 2005. And that, it would seem, would be intelligence not so much about the event of May Day, but more about your personal circumstance, your personality, and the litigation strategy itself. Would you accept that?
Yeah.
But you didn't know anything about that, did you?
I didn't know about it at all, and I think it should have been disclosed to me.
And how does it make you feel not having that disclosed to you?
Very upset, very angry. As I've said, we are supposed to live in a democratic society where, undercover officers should not be allowed to infiltrate and attempt to subvert democratic organisations like the Socialist Party or trade unions. And the fact that they were all talking about me, gathering evidence on me, I find very, very upsetting. And I made the point when I gave evidence before that I have never been arrested. I have never even been cautioned. And there's mention of what happened in Islington over on a student protest where the police, I don't think the police cautioned me. I think they said if the students don't get up, we'll have to caution you. And I said, don't worry, they're getting up in a minute. And the policeman was very friendly and very nice. So I've never even been cautioned. So the fact that the police, the Metropolitan Police, have a huge big file on me, that they're having all sorts of conversations about me that I don't know about, when I've never actually ever been arrested, I think is alarming, and it should not happen in a democratic society. If I've done something wrong, then please arrest me and bring me before a court and say, well, we've got this big file on Lois Austin because we think she's a criminal and we think she's done all these things that are a breach of the peace or she's been involved in violent disorder. But there is no such evidence, and as I said, I've never been arrested. What's happened instead is I think I've been the subject of terrible injustices. I've been beaten, I've been kettled, I've been spied on. The organisations that I'm a member of, which are public organisations, have been infiltrated. And I'm very angry and upset about it. And I was one of the campaigners to make sure that this public inquiry happened. And I'm very glad that it did, because it's given us the chance to talk about what happened to us.
Yeah, there's another little clip. I'll just add that in as well.
I feel very upset that I was a young mum, 2 small children, cross-examined for 2 days in the most hostile fashion about events that we now know were set up and orchestrated by undercover police officers and used as an excuse to contain me for 7.5, 8 hours in Oxford Circus, no access to the toilet. I was lactating at the time, so I was actually in physical pain. I needed to feed my daughter. And then I was told that that was something easy to fabricate by the judge in the judge's findings. And that also that it was implausible and that I was not credible when I said that there was no violence or I saw no violence, when actually a member of the Metropolitan Police, Carlo Soracchi, who was with me in the containment, also said that he saw no violence, but that was never disclosed to the court.
So you're saying that actually there was a source of information there that was accessible, that could have been used actually to support your account of events on May Day 2001?
Absolutely.
Yes, Dave, did you want to come in on that?
Yes. Okay.
I can hear you. Go for it. You're on mute, Dave. You just muted yourself.
Then
there you are. You're back on. No, you're mute. You're on mute. Dave, you're on mute. We can't hear you. There you go. I've unmuted you. I've just unmuted you now.
Oh, okay, good. Where were we? Yeah, the thing that struck me when Lois was giving her evidence is about this obsession with trying to discredit her. And this is where the undercover officers were providing evidence to so-called, making up stuff, basically, to discredit that they could use in the witness box. And one of the things was about this, are people secretly hiding the fact that they're a member of the Socialist Party? Not that it make any difference whatsoever to their evidence, but apparently this would discredit them. But then what I was hoping is that there'd be some comeback to saying, well, when all the police give evidence, are we asking them if they support or are a member of any political party, or Freemasons, which we know a lot of police are in the Freemasons, where you have to swear an oath of loyalty to other Freemasons? And actually, even the Metropolitan Police recently has said that they're going to insist that Freemasons, police in the Freemasons, are going to have to declare it. And there's a huge row behind the scenes about that. So yeah, anyway, the point being that I don't know why the inquiry, pursued that ridiculous line. What are they doing investigating witnesses for their political commitments? Stupid. But I wanted to say that that they were clearly interfering with the legal process of a case that became extremely important, was taken to appeal. It went to the European Court, and actually I think they lost in the European Court, the Lois and the other claimants. And it does mirror the case that I was involved with, which was the McLean case, and the involvement of the undercover police in communicating and collaborating with McDonald's throughout the trial, and misleading the courts as to their role in the publication of the document that we were sued over. That meant they misled the court in the trial. They misled the police. The police misled the Court of Appeal, which we won some further points at, and they misled the European Court of Human Rights, which we actually won the case about. And this is quite serious stuff, and we have a document. Sorry to go on a bit, but just to sort of summarize it, there was a document that Bob Lambert was doing everything he could to prevent Helen Steele finding, who was my co-defendant in the McLean case, finding John Barker, who was the spy cop who had engineered a 2-year-long relationship with her and was reporting on our legal case. She was trying to find him, and Bob Lambert wrote that if she finds out who he is, me and Helen, and indeed Keir Starmer, who was helping us behind the scenes, would be able to call him or the Commissioner of the Police to the trial and force them to testify about their role as undercover police in our case. So this is serious stuff. It would have, if she found him during the trial, our trial, it could have been the end of the SDS and the collapse of our trial. So this trial that Lois was in, this is quite important stuff when they're hiding the role of undercover police in legal cases.
I think it's really important. I mean, I was really surprised by the questioning of Lois, because as far as I can tell,
Someone's got their mic on.
As far as I can tell, this is completely unlawful police, undercover, secret political police interfering in a case where people are actually suing the police. And I mean, this was quite a significant case in terms of public order policing in the City of London. And they used these secret political police to gain litigation advantage. I mean, that is literally what they were doing when they're asking for how to wind up the witness, when they're asking for like dirt to use against them. And, you know, the suggestion made by counsel to the inquiry that, oh, you know, we don't want to relitigate this case, or we do want to relitigate this case. I mean, it was just not about that at all. This is about the police interfering in this civil litigation. And I felt that the inquiry really didn't seem to take that as seriously as I expected that they would, you know, and kind of seemed to treat it like it was a significant point whether or not people were going to say they were in the Socialist Party or not in the Socialist Party. And I mean, it obviously is a serious point, which is why Lois was called back to give this half day of evidence. But at the same time, I think that the key significance of that was kind of lost in the way that counsel to the inquiry dealt with the questioning.
Right on that. Yeah. Just quickly to say, we've got 203 people watching. Only 10 people have liked it. I know it's really cringe to bring up, but if people could share, like the stream, share it. It makes a huge difference how many people get to see it. Emily, you wanted to come in?
Oh yeah, I mean, I know we're coming on to Bishop's bit in a bit, but he admitted in his evidence that he was in the kettle as well, and it's just kind of like, well, there's someone else who was a witness to what happened. And again, I know we're coming into a bit, but there were other cases that Bishop was around for, big civil cases, several of them that, again, you know, some of them weren't even put to him, but where we've got these undercover officers who are not being called to give evidence, whose intelligence is informing a lot of the misconceptions used in witness statements in these cases as well, because we've seen all these exaggerated reporting. We've had cop after cop, you know, admit that things are exaggerated, or we can clearly see that they're exaggerated, but then it's that intelligence that's then being fed back to CO11, to the public order unit, that's then being used to inform these really repressive or violent policing operations, which then activists are taking civil action for, and then we're not seeing the full picture. So, you know, the whole concept, I mean, you know, I always say this very loosely in terms of what justice I expect from the state, but the whole actual sort of notion of justice and how these cases have been litigated is a farce when there's all this hidden information and intelligence and officers.
Yeah, it's true. Does anybody else want to come in and anything about Lois's evidence? If not, we'll segue there into Jason Bishop, who came back for his second day of questioning. There was chased up on a couple of things that were missed, not extensively and not satisfactorily, I would say. I don't want to carry on bashing the Council of Inquiry for the questioning, but there was very limited follow-up, which had obviously been communicated to her. There was stuff about the corporate spies. He said it was a given that they would turn up. That's why he mentioned it. He claimed he was never briefed on them, but he would report when he thought someone was a corporate spy. He was never asked to assess their reporting. He says he was never told when the NPOIU officers were there, who they were, but he was told that they existed. He said that he thought that the NPOIU was set up to mirror the SDS, but they would be evidential rather than intelligence-based. This is the first time I've ever heard this. We discussed it at the time. Nobody else has ever heard this. I don't know whether Jason Bishop was just being willfully ignorant and like pretending that he didn't really understand, or that he was actually genuinely confused about what the NPOIU were. It didn't ring true, him saying that. It didn't ring true that he believed that. So he said that there was a risk of reporting on corporate spies and NPOIU officers because it would be wasting police time. He said that he was.
I think before. Sorry, just to stop you there. That point about the risk. I mean, this is something that he said in his witness statement, that there was a risk if you attended specifically the Earth First gatherings, because all the spies were there. The NPOIU were there, the corporate spies were there, the SDS were there. And he says, so, you know, there was always a risk if you went to the Earth First gathering that you would be reported on by these other officers. And this answer that he gave when he was asked, well, you know, what's the risk? Why is it a risk to be reported on? And, you know, his answer where he says that, you know, it was just a risk that police time would be wasted because, you know, reports would be written about other spies is complete nonsense. And I think that, I mean, first of all, it's not just about wasting police time. I mean, we've all seen these officers in meetings. You know, if Jason Bishop goes to an Earth First gathering and reports on stuff that Mark Kennedy has said about how, I don't know, we need to up the ante and, you know, we need to fight the fascists or whatever, then this is basically the police reporting the police in order to justify their police deployments. And I think there was a question asked at some point about about, you know, what advice they were given about reporting on other police officers. And they were told that they should report on them as though they were other activists. And this is where you get into particularly...
It was another one of these questions that didn't really get followed through. The whole point of the question was about the implication of what happens when you report Mark Kennedy at a meeting or Rob Richardson at a meeting, giving a workshop on the Wombles or whatever and saying that we should tool up. You've now got in the reports, the Wombles are, you know, talking about tooling up, but it's not. It's an undercover cop. It totally taints the intelligence, permanently taints it, because it hangs around for, well, ever, apparently, because we can see it now.
50 years later, we're still seeing it.
It's just not, wasn't followed through, wasn't examined, and it remains the case. And we're going to see this again and again, because we've seen reporting in which the opinions of undercover cops is reported as London activists, for example. It's not.
Yeah, and I think this is something that the reason why Bishop was such an important witness for me, and why I think the inquiry is really messed up by only having him in for a day and a half, is because he is right at the heart of this period, and right at the heart of the groups like the Wombles, like Earth First, like Disarm Dicey, where multiple officers, and coming up to the dissent and the G8, you know, there's by the time you get to the G8 in Scotland, there's dozens of officers there, you know, and not just from London, from other forces, and not just from the UK, but we know that there were, I think, 6 or 7 from Germany. And you know, the inquiry is really kind of avoiding this issue, and the implications in terms of the necessity of the deployments. And this is something else that he wasn't asked about, that I asked counsel to the inquiry to ask him about, is Jason Bishop's deployment spans. He starts in 1998, he finishes in 2005. In first third of his deployment, the Human Rights Act comes into force. The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act comes into force. And there was no examination of how that changed, or if that changed anything, in terms of his practice of undercover policing, in terms of the way undercover policing was managed. So it's this really key period. And all of this stuff where it's all kind of overlapping, and the MPOIU and the SDS are operating together. And yeah, the paltry questions that were answered are very frustrating.
And of course, this is a big issue with Mitting retiring, which I think we can be kind of partially thankful for, is that this crossover period isn't getting seen by one person. So when the T4 chairperson comes along and tries to pick up with T4, and maybe they'll go back over some of whatever Mitting's written up, or maybe they'll go over read all the some kind of gisting of the evidence. I don't know, because they certainly can't read it all, can they? So how many years has it taken us to get this far? So it's going to be missed. They're not really going to be properly up to speed to be able to look at the implications of the crossover.
Yeah, I mean, I will certainly be lobbying for Jason Bishop to be called back in Tranche 4 to talk about this overlap stuff, because he was there.
Emily?
Yeah, and also, you know, it's one of this ridiculous situation where we're giving evidence and writing witness statements when we've only seen half the evidence about the same events. So that, you know, whether it's dissent, some of the dicey stuff, some of the Maydays, we've got SDS officers and MPOU officers spying on us simultaneously, but we're giving evidence on them without having seen half the evidence, and that is a ridiculous situation to be in. Also, I promise I'm not going to talk loads and loads on all of this. You can all try and shut up. But I do want to bring in Martin Hogbin, because Martin was a corporate spy who was embedded into campaign against arms trade at the same time that Jason Bishop was deployed. There is reporting by Jason on Martin. I was very, very close to Martin. And it's one of the issues I wanted the inquiry to explore, what he knew about him and stuff like that. He was asked a very vague question about whether he was aware of any corporate spies, and he just went, oh no. He wasn't asked any questions specifically about Hogbin, and in particular, whether they knew and all the things around that, all the things that we know from like the McLibel case and other things about the way the SDS interacted with corporations and corporate spies. But also we've got reports from when Campaign Against Arms Trade outed him as a spy and about what my reaction to be and stuff like that. Where are the risk assessments? Like, surely this person who Bishop has been going to meetings with by this point for several years is uncovered as a corporate spy. And before it's all like, oh yeah, I knew who, I could always spot them and stuff like that. Well, if you hadn't spotted Hogbin, then what was the risk assessment afterwards? Where were the conversations in the back office? Like, surely if they didn't know, it wasn't just, oh, there's a corporate spy in CAT, rather than someone who's been involved in the organizing groups that one of your undercover officers has been involved in. And there were no questions around any of that. There was no naming Martin by name and asking him directly about those reports about Martin. And again, huge area that was missed that you can tell I'm very angry about.
I mean, I was really surprised by that, because it's not even as if Martin Hogbin was a secret. It's like that was public knowledge. It's been in the media. It's been quite well publicised. Loads of people know about it. It's not like the inquiry.
There was a play.
Trashing Hogbin. Yeah, it's not like his privacy is being trashed for the first time. But it was really quite shocking that the inquiry didn't even mention CAT having corporate spies, never mind Martin by name. It wasn't just nothing.
A massive oversight, one of many. Jason Bishop was questioned about Dicey, the protest against Defence Systems Exhibition International Arms Fair 2001. Also, Dave, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just sorry on the corporate spies issue, which I'm slightly interested in, as people might know. It's obviously the police are part of their role is to protect the status quo and the power of corporations, and obviously the role of protesters is to challenge the power of corporations and the establishment. So it seems to be a very sensitive area in this inquiry about the relations with corporations generally and corporate spies. In fact, remind me, one of the witnesses, was it Bishop or was it the other one, said how he was asked to check the intelligence of corporate spies. I think he mentioned someone from Shell.
Boiling. That was Boiling.
Was that Boiling? Admission that nobody has, admitted before, that corporations were gaining intelligence on protesters, and SDS officers were asked to check how accurate it was. He said it often wasn't very accurate. Unlike the SDS, of course, who are professionals and their intelligence is accurate all the time. So that was a very important point, and the point is who was communicating with Shell, and shows, and this is the same with McDonald's with our case, is they're prepared to work with corporate security and representatives, which is clearly a security threat to the existence of the SDS, which they're willing to risk when it comes to supporting corporations, because theoretically the SDS is meant to be an highly secret unit, and yet in fact they're collaborating with corporations and corporate spies. And when we've asked about McDonald's and the McLeod case in the inquiry, we've asked, we know we've got the documentary evidence that there was collusion. All the managers that up to now that have been asked about it said, "Oh, it must have been happening at a high level." But so far, the highest level we received was of a witness was Commander Gunn, who was a commander level. And they've all said, "Oh, we didn't know anything about it." So they're basically lying, but they don't want to admit that at a high level there was corporate and police collusion against protesters, basically. Having said that, I want to get one more thing in before we wind up, whatever. But basically, it's quite clear for anybody watching the inquiry that all of the police witnesses are quite prepared to, obfuscate, lie, and they're only really admitting things when they've got no alternative because of the documentary evidence. And yet all of the civilian witnesses and protesters, they're all entirely honest, transparent. They're taking a big step going into the witness box and revealing their personal circumstances and experiences, and they're all magnificent. So I think that's to everyone's credit, and it's particularly when Lindsey said how getting all the different campaign groups to work together has been a revelation for her, and almost like justifies her involvement in this very difficult process, this public inquiry. It's the solidarity amongst the witnesses and the core participants that really is admirable and should be recognised and applauded by everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Just to quickly run through some of the stuff that Jason Bishop was questioned on. There was stuff about Disarm Dicey 2001. He talks about being involved with the production of the props, reporting on the props. They end up getting impounded after the police raided the place they were stored. He doesn't know if that was because of his intelligence or not. I think we can guess it probably was. He talked about the Fairford coaches. He wasn't there that day, and we had one of those things we referred to earlier about the way in which the questions were. It was clear that he obviously was doing something else that was very important that we weren't to be told about. It was very strange questioning there. We got on to Dicey 2003, which was his involvement in that. And then we got to the 2004 Farnborough Air Show Gala Dinner. And I've got a little clip from that, which I'll play. One of the incidents which he was questioned on, but very frustratingly, we didn't get to see all the evidence about, was the Farnborough Air Show Gala Dinner.
Yeah.
An incident where there is some very revealing video footage, which the inquiry decided not to play.
It's video evidence from one of the forward intelligence teams who were at the site.
It's a really compelling piece of footage. It relates to an action that yourself and others were partaking in. Basically, essentially a piece of street theatre.
Oh, it was a piece of street theatre. We had these dismembered dolls from the pound shop that I'd covered in, I can't remember if it was red paint or food dye, can't remember now. You can see in the video, I have these bag of dolls that are a bit damp.
So this is an email I sent on the 9th of July that first mentioned the dolls. So I presume you would have been a recipient of this email.
Yes.
What would people feel about doing a spoof on this and maybe having some dolls with fake blood dripping off them and try to present them with dead baby awards as they're trying to enter? Or is this too macabre? Was it your understanding that this protest was going to be symbolic?
Yes.
But the intelligence reads, Enviro activists will demonstrate at the gala dinner for the Farnborough Air Show hosted by the Grosvenor House Hotel on Tuesday the 20th of July. They believe the guest of honour will be Lord George Robertson. The activists plan to make their own presentation to Lord Robertson, which will consist of a doll, possibly filled with fake blood, to represent children killed during conflicts by the arm trade. There may also be other dolls and legs and arms of dolls thrown onto the point where Lord Robertson's car pulls up. And then the source comment reads, there is no hostile intent in throwing the dolls. Can you just help us with, again, to the best of your recollection, what you understood this action of throwing the dolls? The suggestion they were going to be thrown at the car or on the floor as the car pulls up. Can you remember?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Again, the email that we've seen, it doesn't single out Lord Robertson in particular.
So we get there and we're immediately kind of, in his words, manhandled into this pen. He kind of completely admits it was a disproportionate policing response to what we were doing. I get sort of singled out to be stopped and searched. He grabs my bag and tries to pull me back, which again, we didn't sort of come back into the kind of him obstructing police bit. And eventually I get thrown on the floor and arrested for going equipped to commit criminal damage.
Well, if you let me go and I'm going to ask you that. So you're stopping me from talking to me, is that what you're saying on camera? You're not going to tell me what you've been arrested for, is that what you're saying? I don't know what I'll go and find out.
Looking at this document, which is the branch note dated the 4th of November 2004 by DCI Mike Dell. On Tuesday, the 20th of July 2004, outside the Grosvenor House Hotel, Park Lane, two of a group of anti-arms trade activists protesting their displeasure at the hotel hosting the Farnborough banquet were searched by police and found in possession of several toy dolls. Amongst the group of activists was a detective constable, a member of the Metropolitan Police Special Branch undercover unit, who is engaged on a long-term intelligence gathering operation against these and associated activists. The officer was not arrested. The solicitor acting for both defendants has asked the officer to make statements supporting the defendants' in brackets fabricated version of events, that the dolls were props for use in street theatre. The officer has also been told to give evidence in court. I would be grateful for your assistance in achieving resolution to this matter. Why did he say it was fabricated?
I'm afraid I can't help you. My only thinking that you've seen my reporting that they were to be thrown. Maybe he's disputing that street theatre and throwing them were incompatible. But I can't comment for him.
Would you agree that the defence that they were going to be used in street theatre wasn't in fact fabricated?
They were going to be thrown at the Lord Robertson, I believe. That's what we reported.
Well, that's not quite what you reported, though, is it, HN3? You said that they were going to be thrown in the area where the car pulls up and that there was no hostile intent.
No, that's what I said.
Yeah, so but that's not quite the same, sorry, as being thrown at Lord Robertson. That sounds...
No, okay, I take your point. Yes, I think we're...
Would you agree that even on that account, that's not criminal damage?
So he was listed as one of my witnesses. I always thought that the charges were dropped because it was utter bullshit. Like, it was just kind of like, I had a bag of dolls, bit of fake blood on them. Yeah, so in this video, sorry, going back, in the video, there's all this footage after I've been arrested of him arguing with the cops and saying that they wanted to come and talk to me about my baby and making sure that my baby's okay. Yeah, so, but the charges eventually got dropped, but they got dropped that it went all the way up to commander level, and they said that I was fabricating my defense. They are accusing me of being prepared to commit perjury and being prepared to pervert the course of justice. And Bishop reiterates this in his witness statement, that he couldn't possibly have breached legal privilege because I'd fabricated my defense.
It sounds quite decisive. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yes, I'd agree.
And that under those circumstances to circulate or to have been part of a chain of information, or at least the source of information, which is relayed up the chain of command in the Metropolitan Police, suggesting that Emily Apple is willing to commit perjury or is planning to commit perjury, is actually grossly unfair to Miss Apple and also a breach of legal professional privilege. Do you think that's fair?
No, I don't think that's what's been discussed.
But can you not see that the implication is, if you're saying that her defence is going to be fabricated, or that's...
I didn't say that. He said that.
But you do repeat it in your witness statement, though.
Undoubtedly, I think I would have read that from the document that I got.
Right, so you're echoing what's written in the Mike Dell document rather than making that judgment from your own
Yes, exactly that. Sorry, I now understand what you're saying.
Right,
yes.
Okay.
And he just kind of said, oh, well, I just went off the documents when I was writing my witness statement, or something like that. But then that wasn't pursued as well. It's just like all these times where there's been stuff that has contradicted stuff in his witness statement, but it's an official document to the inquiry that is, that he's kind of gone, oh no, that probably wasn't right. I will just leave that then. And it's obviously clear that I haven't fabricated my defense from all the reams of evidence that I've got. But it's this thing, it's just kind of like, it's really lucky that I have got so much evidence. Like this, if I hadn't kept all this stuff, it would be my word against his, and it would just been, it would have just been another thing that's just accepted.
Yeah, do you want, does everyone want to come in on that at all? I'll just remove that. I'm very aware that we're we said we wouldn't, but we're getting close to the 3-hour mark on this broadcast. So, I mean, just to quickly kind of run through some of the other stuff that Jason Bishop was questioned on. We had a bunch of stuff about the G8 in Scotland, about how he got arrested while he was operating what was known as the activist taxi service, driving people from Glasgow to the camp, the Glen Eagles camp. There was a bunch of stuff, which I think is really important, actually, about the way in which his intelligence was being fed to the forward intelligence teams, who were, I mean, it's something we talked about in the video that those clips were just from, who took like this immense personal dislike to Emily Apple, and essentially kind of like pounced on her like every opportunity. And we saw that there was a report that said that that Emily was intending to take some direct action on 10th of November 2004, Stop the War demo in Parliament Square, and that she was expecting to be arrested. Then we shown the report by the forward intelligence team saying they'd managed to intervene and stop any criminal damage by accosting Emily Apple. Really gross. I mean, as Emily said when we chatted at the time, just like not a time and a place that she was likely to be taking any kind of direct action. A Stop the War march, absolutely insane, really. Yeah, there was a lot of other stuff. I am running through it a bit just because we've been doing this for nearly 3 hours. But yeah, it was very frustrating. There was a lot of things that really felt like it hasn't been covered. I think it was particularly frustrating, again, as we said about Mitting's comments at the end. He thanked Jason Bishop for his frankness and bluntness and willingness to accept that he sometimes wasn't right. Which, I mean, I think it would be more correct is to thank him for occasionally admitting to remember something, because the vast majority of the answer to the vast majority of questions was, I can't recall. I don't dispute, but I can't recall. Yeah, what do people make of Jason Bishop?
So, I mean, just on that point that you made about, we're rushing through, but counsel rushed through as well. And there was one thing that particularly stood out to me. I mean, he was asked some questions about me that I had asked counsel to the inquiry to ask. I'm not even going to bother saying, because she basically fluffed them, got it completely wrong, assumed that I was asking those questions because I was in a relationship with Mark Kennedy at the time, which I wasn't. But at that point, she said, are you also reported that Kate Wilson led a nomadic lifestyle in 2006, but we'll be coming to that. They never did come to that. And I think it was quite clear that, you know, we had more questions to ask, but I think counsel to the inquiry also had more questions that she had intended to ask and ran out of time, and they just accepted that, you know, we've run out of time. These questions that we've considered important enough to spend, what is it, £100 an hour? I don't know how much they're spending on these barristers.
I heard it's 100,000 a day for the hearings, in which case that's 150,000 spaffed up the wall, in the words of Boris Johnson, because this CTI isn't able to do it. No good.
This report that they didn't come to in 2006, I think is worth mentioning, because actually it's one of a vast number of reports, and they did ask questions about some of them, very, very small number. But what this actually is after Bishop finished his deployment, he retired, or whatever he did. He went on to do whatever incredibly important job he does now that means he's protected. And in his annual leave at the end of his deployment, he spent his time writing up what he remembered about all of us. And the entry about me says something daft, like I live a nomadic lifestyle. I move from squat to squat, and some of the people that I've been close to over the years. But there's lots of really, really nasty personal stuff, depending on how close he was to the people he was writing these things up on. Some of them contain photographs. He refers to it as the binder. And I think really a lot more questions need to be asked about this. And it's one of those things that it wasn't asked by the inquiry, and we can't talk about it because the evidence hasn't been published, but it's something that I think we are going to want to come back to at some point.
Yeah.
Emily?
I'll try and be very, very, very quick because I have a huge amount to say, so I will try not to start talking. But in terms of things that we didn't cover, like we didn't touch on Dicey 2005 at all, where we discovered the spot cards. Dicey 2003. Like, this is why you're supposed to be infiltrating. Like, we didn't cover it. So much about Dicey 2003 that we didn't cover. I have a very, very, very long list of things that weren't covered. Nothing about his exit strategy. And then the things that were covered weren't covered properly. Follow-up questions weren't asked. Very, very, very quickly, because I know we want to finish with the Farnborough video that you showed. Mitting makes a comment at the end to make a really unhelpful clarification, and it stops the questioning dead. There were follow-up questions. She was getting to the point of, you have said this is fabricated in your witness statement, and he needed to be asked whether he still thought it was fabricated, having looked at the evidence, given he said that my arrest was odd, that it was arbitrary, that it was disproportionate. He needed that follow-up question. Mitting gave an out. That was disgusting. Yeah, I'll shut up because I'll just carry on again.
No further. Karen?
Really disappointing. Again, I really hope that he gets brought back for another day, but I'm not holding my breath. The only good thing about his evidence was that he basically told us all that, yeah, Jim Boylan was lying the week before or 2 weeks before about this whole story about going around to his flat or whatever. I mean, he totally disagreed with Jim and wasn't prepared to go along with Jim's story. But yeah, so much stuff was missing.
I mean, he did disagree with Jim, but at the same time, he was saying, Jim never told me he was in a relationship with Rosa. That was the baseline of his disagreement with Jim, and they disagreed about locations. But the fundamental point was he knew. He must have known. You know, him and I were in the same group at that time, like 1999, 2000, with Jim and Rosa. That, you know, it's not something he wouldn't have known. They were openly a couple in the group. And so, yes, I mean, these points where they contradict each other, it's kind of who has the most to lose and who has the most to gain.
I've got a final comment. That video was fascinating, and it's a real shame that the inquiry didn't show it. I think it's really important that that kind of video is shown. It reminds me a lot of the Good Easter video, watching his behaviour, getting in there, physical with the cops, being kind of a bit leery in your face. I'm not saying that none of us are like that, but it's the question, which was never put to boiling, about the motivation and the intention behind that kind of behavior, whether it was discussed in advance, whether it would have mattered whether he got arrested, whether there had been anything raised about that possibility. You know, people haven't seen those videos unless they've seen them on Twitter, I guess. And he was shown it privately at the beginning or something.
Yeah, he was shown
Inquiry
it
is not
before. But the inquiry hadn't, like, Daisy hadn't seen that video 2 days before. We had to insist that we sat down with her and watched it about why it was so important that it was played to her. And she was like, oh, I was expecting like really serious disorder. Well, you know, you've had it for 10 months. It was just, oh, but they wasted a question on asking whether his concern for my baby was genuine. They managed to ask that, and he was like, oh, of course it was. Like, well, of course it fucking wasn't. You know, your entire job was lying to us and pretending to be concerned for us. I mean, what a stupid question.
And I am struck by the fact that if the public really want to follow what's going on here, they're really seriously hampered by the fact that none of this evidence was available to them. Emily, your statement has still not been published on the inquiry's website. The Reclaim the Street statement still hasn't been published. And all these documents they're referring to throughout these days of evidence still haven't been put online. So it's a joke.
Bristol Keras, I'm aware you haven't spoken for a bit. I just wondered if you wanted to add something before we finish.
The main thing for me is that it's been really instructive to see chairman and council behave in such a transparently partisan way. The lack of preparedness and the clear way that they just don't see how the rest of us are seeing this evidence. That the questions that they're not answering, it's frustrating that they're not asking them. But equally, the negative space that they're creating, I think, paints a very clear picture for anyone coming to this without a lot of the information that we don't yet have. So overall, I think that it's been very helpful, even if it's not the words of Jason Bishop. It's more the way that the inquiry is behaving around him. So yeah, it's been a good week that way.
Dave?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I mean, I think one of the reasons that they're taking this approach now, they basically just want to get the inquiry over with, which isn't surprising because in 2023, Mitting's already ruled in his interim judgment that the SDS should have been wound up in the early 1970s. So basically,
Dave, he's now saying that we haven't seen the stuff enclosed. He's managing expectations for the next report.
I know. But basically, he's basically saying the SDS should have been wound up. It's got worse since then. Their behaviour and the tactics, the deployments have employed have got worse and more extreme. So I think from their point of view, as part of the establishment, this whole inquiry is extremely embarrassing, shocking, all bad publicity. Every day, it's more bad news for the Metropolitan Police and all those who participated and authorised these units. And they just want to get it over with as quickly as possible and get out. And they're stuck. They can't. But they're skating over a lot of stuff. But that's because not only have they said that the unit should have been wound up in the 1970s, the Metropolitan Police have now made at least 5 grovelling apologies about various tactics and targeting strategies. And obviously there's more apologies to come. But I just think the bigger picture, we often get stuck in the detail. But the bigger picture is this inquiry is all bad news for the establishment, and they know it.
Well, these broadcasts are all about the detail. Before we wrap up, Zoe, did you want to say something before we finish?
Yeah, really quick, thanks. Yeah, completely agree with what you're saying, Dave. And there was one thing that Jason Bishop was very keen to emphasise was that when he was posing as someone who pirated films, software, and gave it out to people, he was very keen to specify that it was CDs and not DVDs. And I note that witnesses have stated that he was not only giving out DVDs of cracked software, but he was installing software on activists' laptops. And this was back in, 25 years ago. Pirating was a thing. Backdoors, ways into bugging people's laptops was a thing. And I wonder if anyone's looking into that side of it. I think it could be important. And finally, I think the way that Mitting and the CTI were trying to tie things off and shut things down at the end, and we're all behind a wall. But even the lawyers were so fed up that everyone was kind of cried out, saying, no, we do have more questions. And you could hear the chair saying, oh, do you hear something through the wall? And it really brought home to me the fact that if there hadn't have been people in the public gallery backing up those lawyers there, that we wouldn't have even had the few extra questions that we would have. And the importance and value of having more people in the public gallery, I think, would really help them, help stop them shutting things down and help encourage them to keep asking questions when there are a lot of questions still to be asked. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really encourage anybody, if you're able to, come to the hearings next week. We'll be hearing from the undercover officer, Carlo Soracchi, who was the undercover officer who deceived Donna and Lindsey, who we heard from this week. There'll be 4 days of questioning, though often it only lasts 3 days, Monday to Wednesday, possibly Thursday as well. Come along if you can. We'll be covering it in detail as we always do. Thanks for joining us. It's been another long one, another 3 hour long one. So I won't battle on with it too much. Thanks to the comments we've got from people saying that these are useful. I hope that they are. If you're able to engage with the inquiry in whatever way, whether that's sharing the posts and videos that people make during the hearings, or you're commenting yourself on what's being said. Thanks for joining us. You can find this episode of the recap will be edited down into an episode of the Spy Cops Info podcast. You can find previous episodes of the Spy Cops Info podcast at spycops.info. You can find all the information on this topic and things related to it just by looking for the hashtag SpyCops. We'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.